They called him broken until he saved a life. They said he wasn't fit to serve, that no one could train him. Too aggressive, too damaged, too far gone. Shadow was a number in a cage, just another discarded dog from a program no one wanted to talk about. But the thing about German Shepherds is, they don't forget. And when the right person finally looks into their eyes, not through them, but into them, something begins to heal. This story isn't just about a dog. It's about a girl with a scarred heart, a system that failed them both, and how the unlikeliest bond lit a fire of justice that changed lives, changed laws, and changed everything. Stay with us, because once you meet Shadow, you'll understand why some souls were never meant to be forgotten. The rain had stopped sometime around dawn, but the streets of Elliston still gleamed with the memory of it. Puddles shimmered under pale amber streetlights, and the courthouse stood like a silent witness beneath a pewter sky, its old stone facade stained by time, by secrets, and perhaps by the weight of what was coming. Officer Marcus Reyes stood next to the K-9 transport unit, his gloved hand resting on the reinforced kennel door. Inside, Blitz sat alert, silent. Those deep amber eyes locked with Reyes's steady, unreadable. Not a single bark, just presence. That kind of quiet didn't come from obedience. It came from something older, more primal. Reyes reached down, unclipped the latch, and opened the crate. Blitz stepped out with the fluid grace of a creature that had known both freedom and confinement. German Shepherds were known for discipline, but Blitz moved with something more, an instinct, almost too precise. Some officers joked he had a sixth sense. Others whispered about that day in the marshlands, when he tracked a kidnapped girl through 4 miles of waterlogged terrain without a lead. But Reyes knew better than to explain Blitz. Some things, he'd learned, aren't meant to be explained. "Today's the big one, buddy," Reyes murmured, tugging gently on the vest's Velcro strap as he secured the K-9 unit harness. It bore the patch, Elliston PD, K-9 unit, and below that, almost faded. No room for error. Blitz blinked once, then sat. The trial of Victor Hale had dominated headlines for weeks, no, months. Real estate tycoon, billionaire, philanthropist on paper. But behind the curtain, a network of bribes, land seizures, forged inspection reports, and 3 unsolved disappearances, all tied subtly, of course, to his empire. It was the kind of case that made careers or destroyed them. And today, Reyes and Blitz were assigned courtroom security. There were rumors that Hale had eyes in every department, that the judge, old man Carruthers, had received threats, that someone on the jury had been approached. Reyes didn't put stock in gossip, but he felt it in his gut. Something was coming. And Blitz had been tense since last night. Uncharacteristically so. He'd refused to eat, stared at the apartment door for over 2 hours, ears pricked towards something Reyes couldn't hear. And when Reyes finally lay down around midnight, Blitz had padded over to the bedroom window and growled softly, like a warning not for the outside world, but for him. Now, as they crossed the threshold into the courthouse, something in Reyes bristled. The marble foyer was unusually quiet for a day like this. Security was tighter, sure. Uniforms at every checkpoint, metal detectors humming like angry bees, but the silence felt rehearsed. People spoke in low tones, avoided eye contact. It wasn't tension, it was calculation. Blitz moved ahead, nose low to the ground but tail high. His steps were silent, deliberate. He paused once near the clerk's desk, sniffed a satchel case by the filing cabinet, then moved on without a signal. Reyes had come to trust that judgment more than any protocol. "Morning, Reyes," a voice called. It was Captain Marlowe, clipboard in hand, wearing the weary scowl of someone who hadn't slept. Reyes nodded. "Any developments?" Marlowe glanced around, then leaned in. "They're rushing the witness list. Hale's team filed for exclusion of new evidence. Judge is pushing back. We need this trial airtight." Reyes didn't ask what was meant by airtight. He just said, "Understood," and gave Blitz a tap on the flank. They moved toward the courtroom's inner security ring. As they passed through the hallway lined with portraits of long-dead judges, Blitz slowed again, ears tilting slightly to the left. Reyes paused, watching his partner's posture change. A stiffness crept into the shepherd's body. Not aggression, not alertness. Something else, like recognition. "Blitz," Reyes whispered, but the dog kept staring at one specific portrait. Judge Walter E. Thorne. Served 1956, 1978. No obvious reason for the reaction. But Blitz didn't move until Reyes gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He finally looked away, but not before Reyes saw it. A flicker in those amber eyes. Almost like memory. But that couldn't be. Could it? They made their way to the courtroom doors, just as the press started trickling in. Reyes scanned the perimeter. Balcony, clear. Benches, empty. Bailiff, on station. He walked the perimeter once more. Blitz followed, calm but focused, tail like a pendulum metronoming quiet tension. Inside, Victor Hale arrived. 3 men in suits flanked him. Not lawyers, not police. They moved like private security hands twitching near their belts, eyes scanning every exit like they'd drawn blood before. Blitz let out a low, almost inaudible growl. It wasn't command-driven, wasn't reflex. It was instinct. Reyes placed a calming hand on his back, but Blitz didn't settle. Instead, he shifted posture, placing himself between Reyes and the aisle Hale would walk through. "Easy," Reyes whispered, but something in his chest tightened. The kind of tightness that doesn't come from fear, but from knowing that today wasn't going to follow the script. And Blitz already knew it. The courtroom was too quiet for a girl like Mira Carter. She sat in the second row, feet dangling from a chair too tall, hands cupped tightly around something most adults wouldn't even notice. A half-melted bracelet, blackened at the edges, its beads fused together like fossilized memories. Her fingers, small and pale, trembled against the cool surface. Her shoulders hunched as if shrinking herself would make her invisible. No one noticed the girl with the honey-brown hair, pulled back in a braid too neat to have been done by her own hands. No one, except Blitz. The police dog stood with Officer Reyes near the front, silent and alert. Though trained to scan crowds for weapons, threats, shifts in movement, his gaze rested momentarily on Mira, as if something in her scent, her stillness, or perhaps the grief buried in her posture, stirred something deeper in him. But he didn't move. Not yet. The judge hadn't arrived. The murmurs of legal counsel and the metallic shuffle of evidence carts filled the air like dust in a shaft of morning sun. Mira didn't look at any of it. Her eyes were fixed on the empty witness stand ahead. She knew, eventually, someone would call her up there. Her heart beat like a small animal in her chest. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the fire. 3 years since that night, her world turned red and orange and black. 3 years since she last saw Shadow. The flashbacks came not in a flood, but in sharp, clipped fragments. A siren, a scream that might have been her own. Her mother's hands grabbing her from under the table. Smoke so thick it became part of her lungs. And then fur, brushing against her ankle. A bark. Loud. Panicked. Loyal. Shadow hadn't made it out. Mira swallowed hard. Her therapist said she didn't have to speak if she didn't want to, that they could use drawings or a written statement. But her father, pale, thin, tired in ways no sleep could fix, had held her hands last night and whispered, "Only if you're ready, baby." But your voice could help stop this from happening again. Mira wasn't sure if she was ready. But she had come. Across the room, Victor Hale entered with his legal team. Sharp suit, hollow smile. His presence drew the hush out of the room like gravity. Mira didn't look directly at him, but she felt it. That weight, that certainty that this man, with all his money and smooth words, walked into this room not to seek justice, but to escape it. Hale passed within feet of her. Blitz's ears perked up not in aggression, but in attention, like a thread had been pulled tight inside him. Officer Reyes felt it too. A subtle shift in Blitz's body, a ripple of instinct. Mira kept her eyes down. Her thumb brushed over the bubbled surface of the bracelet. She remembered when Shadow found it in the debris, days after the fire, his muzzle ash-covered, tail low but wagging. They'd returned once she and her father when the site was safe enough. Shadow had darted into the rubble and come out with this melted band between his teeth. He'd carried it like a relic. She hadn't let it go since. Her lips parted slightly now, almost whispering his name. Shadow. Tears pressed at the corners of her eyes, but didn't fall. She wouldn't cry here. She couldn't. Not in front of the man who had stolen her mother's life, their home, and her best friend. A soft nudge against her elbow startled her. Blitz. Reyes had led him closer, apparently as part of courtroom protocol. But the dog had gently stepped out of line, just enough to let his nose brush Mira's arm. Their eyes met. She wasn't sure what she saw in those dark eyes, but something, an echo, a warmth, a sadness that didn't feel foreign passed between them. She didn't flinch. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Sorry about that, Reyes whispered, gently tugging Blitz back to heel. But Mira shook her head slightly. It's okay, she whispered. Reyes blinked, surprised she spoke. Across the aisle, a woman from the DA's office took note. Is this the Carter girl? She whispered to her assistant. She's younger than I expected. Looks quiet. Might not testify. Doesn't have to speak to move a jury. Back in her seat, Mira closed her eyes. And for a moment, she wasn't in the courtroom. She was back in her bedroom, curled under blankets, Shadow's head resting on her feet. The smell of burned wood and sirens faded into the scent of wet fur, peanut butter, and the soft hum of a lullaby her mother used to hum. That night, the fire had come too fast. Her mother had gotten her out, but gone back for the neighbor's baby. She never returned. Shadow had tried. He had stayed behind too long. When the firefighters pulled him out, it was too late. The bracelet was all that remained of that night, of that family. Until today. She opened her eyes, looked at the witness stand, a place where people told the truth. She didn't know what would happen, didn't know if she would be brave enough, but she remembered something her mother once told her. The truth has a sound, Mira, even if you whisper it. The courtroom breathed in rigid silence. The wooden panels seemed to hold their breath along with the people within them, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to shift. Officer Reyes stood tall, stoic in uniform, with Blitz, a striking German shepherd at his side. Reyes' hand hovered near the leash, eyes sharp, scanning the room not for threats, but for nuances, body language, hidden tells, the subtle twitch of guilt in the eyes of Victor Hale's defense team. He had trained Blitz for moments like this: ceremonial security, crowd surveillance, the silent assertion of control. But Blitz was no ordinary K9. His gaze, dark and amber-like, locked onto something not in the perimeter Reyes had calculated. Something softer, something smaller. The girl. She was seated in the back row, partially hidden by the frame of an older woman's shoulder. Her fingers curled tightly around the frayed ribbon of a burnt bracelet, its metal charms tarnished with ash and years. She didn't fidget like other children did when bored in adult spaces. She didn't glance at her surroundings or shift her weight. She simply sat, still, watching, waiting. And Blitz, he moved. Not with a bark, not with a growl, not with the urgency of detecting contraband or a threat. He moved with intention, silently. Reyes barely had time to tighten his grip before the leash slipped through his fingers. A gasp escaped someone in the front row. A sharp crack of the judge's gavel sounded, but Blitz did not flinch. He walked slowly, with something that looked too much like reverence for an animal trained for aggression. Reyes's heart skipped. He called softly, firmly, Blitz, heel. But the dog didn't obey. He kept walking, each paw step soft against the marble floor, as though he knew exactly what he was doing. Reyes took a step forward, torn between protocol and the strange, almost spiritual pull in the air. And then it happened. Blitz stopped in front of Mira Carter. The little girl looked up, eyes wide, mouth slightly open but soundless. Her fingers trembled around the bracelet. It wasn't fear that gripped her. It was memory. Blitz lowered his head, inch by inch, until the tip of his nose touched the soot-stained bracelet in her hands. The room fell into a hush so deep, it felt like the wind had stopped outside. No one moved. Blitz didn't sniff. He didn't bark. He simply rested his muzzle against the charm, a small, charred paw print hanging loosely from its chain, and closed his eyes. Mira exhaled, ragged and slow. Her hand lifted, almost unwilling, until her small fingers touched the side of Blitz's face. Not just petting, searching, feeling. And then came the tear. Just one. It rolled down her cheek, fell silently onto the back of her hand. Judge Bannister leaned forward slightly, his stern expression faltering. Even Victor Hale, seated at the defendant's table, looked up from his file, confused by the disruption and something else. Unease. Whispers broke out behind them. "Did you see that? What's going on? Is that part of the—" But Reyes didn't move. He couldn't. His voice caught in his throat as he watched the dog he'd trained to follow protocol defy it completely for a child he'd never met. He moved forward slowly, clearing his throat. "Blitz, back, come." Blitz opened his eyes, but didn't budge. He looked up at Mira instead. Something unspoken passed between them, something older than language. Mira finally whispered, voice so soft that only those closest could hear. "Shadow." Her grandmother turned sharply, face paling. Reyes' brow furrowed. "What did she say?" The judge adjusted his glasses. "Officer Reyes, what exactly is the meaning of this?" I'm not sure, Your Honor. He's never acted like this. Never." Blitz finally pulled back, but not entirely. He sat down beside Mira's bench, like a guardian returning home after a long journey. Reyes moved cautiously, crouching beside him, studying the girl, then the bracelet. "May I see that?" he asked gently. Mira hesitated, then nodded. She held it out, the ribbon unwrapping slightly as it moved. Reyes took it, inspecting the edges, the singe marks, the embedded soot. And then he saw it an old tag charm, worn down from time. On the back, barely visible beneath grime and heat damage. Shadow, K9, Unit 14B. His breath left him in a short, stunned exhale. Reyes looked at Blitz, looked at the girl, then looked at the courtroom, now wide-eyed and buzzing beneath the surface. Shadow. That name hadn't been uttered in his precinct for years. 3 years ago, a fire had destroyed a safe house during a sting operation involving Hale's real estate empire. Reyes had heard rumors, whispers, that Hale had ordered the arson to silence a witness, a child. But no one ever confirmed who the child was. The dog assigned to her, Shadow, had been listed as KIA. Presume it dead. But Blitz. He turned slowly to the German Shepherd, his training suddenly clashing with the truth bleeding into the room. Blitz wasn't Blitz. He was Shadow. And Mira was the witness they'd all forgotten. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just awe now. It was reckoning. Mira Carter's fingers trembled around the singed bracelet in her lap, its once vibrant threads dulled by time and soot. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. It had slipped out like a memory too powerful to contain. Shadow? The word hung in the courtroom like a ghost, whispered so softly it might have gone unnoticed if not for the sudden way Blitz turned. Officer Reyes, still near the front, instinctively glanced back at the girl on the bench. Mira was pale, wide-eyed, her voice caught between a whisper and a sob. Blitz stood stone still beside her, his muzzle still resting against the frayed threads of her bracelet, his ears slowly shifting back. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters lifted cameras with a rustle of jackets. The judge peered over his glasses. The jury leaned forward, confused and curious. But none of it pierced deeper than the look on Victor Hale's face. For the briefest moment, the poised real estate tycoon buttoned in gray wool, spine perfectly straight, blinked too slow. His jaw tightened, just slightly, but his smile returned fast. A curated ease rehearsed for decades in boardrooms and press conferences. Reyes's voice cut through the tension. "Mira," he said gently, walking back toward her. "What did you say?" Mira didn't answer. Her small hands clutched the bracelet tighter, holding it against her chest now. Blitz didn't move away. If anything, he sat closer, his body aligned perfectly with hers, like a soldier guarding his post. Reyes crouched down beside them. "You called him Shadow," he said. She nodded. Once. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She looked up at Reyes, and there was something heartbreaking in the way her lips parted, like she hadn't spoken that name in years. "My dog," she said, barely louder than before. "His name was Shadow." Reyes's breath caught. Blitz, Shadow? It didn't make sense. Blitz had been assigned to him barely a year ago, pulled from a recovery program after being found as a stray with impressive K9 aptitude. There was no owner on file, no microchip, no name, just the new badge and a brutal training record. But this girl, this child, looked at Blitz. Not like he was a stranger, but like someone she'd once dreamed of and cried for. Reyes glanced toward the judge. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess. There appears to be new information relevant to the character of the K-9 officer." The judge, confused but intrigued, nodded slowly. 10 minutes. The courtroom burst into hushed chatter as people stood and stretched. But Reyes stayed crouched. Mira hadn't moved. "You know this dog?" he asked softly. "I used to," she whispered. "Before the fire." The bracelet in her hands began to tremble. Reyes exhaled and looked at Blitz again. The dog's body was still. His eyes weren't on Reyes anymore. They were fixed on Mira. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled of stale coffee and old wood. Reyes leaned against the wall, his hands on his hips, trying to make sense of the moment. He had never seen Blitz act that way, never break command, never disobey. The dog had always been precise, focused, silent. But something had shifted. Reyes turned as a gentle voice spoke behind him. "She lost everything in that fire," said a woman in a beige cardigan holding a clipboard. It was Mira's court-appointed advocate. Her parents didn't make it. The fire marshal said it was arson, but they never found the cause. There were inconsistencies. The house was on land owned by Victor Hale. Reyes's eyes sharpened. "Wait, Hale owned the land?" She nodded. "It was supposed to be sold for a luxury resort. Mira's parents refused to move. 6 weeks later, the house went up in flames." He looked down at Blitz, who sat silently beside him, but kept glancing at the courtroom door like waiting for someone. "The dog?" Reyes asked. The advocate sighed. "We thought he died in the fire too. There was no trace." Mira never stopped asking about him. Inside, Mira sat alone at the bench again, running her fingers over the burn marks in the bracelet. They weren't just scorched threads, they were remnants of the last birthday her parents celebrated with her. The bracelet had been Shadow's collar. Her dad had woven it with his own hands, adding a bell at the end, so she could always hear Shadow when he came bounding around the corner. She remembered that sound even now. Soft, joyful, home. When the fire came, it was in the middle of the night. There had been shouting, breaking glass. Her father had scooped her up and tried to run. Smoke filled her lungs. Her last memory was Shadow barking furiously, charging toward the front of the house toward something or someone. And then, nothing but heat and silence. Until now. Until Blitz. When the courtroom reconvened, Mira stayed seated. Blitz sat beside her as if he had never left. Victor Hale, now visibly tense beneath his tailored suit, leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. Reyes watched him closely. His pulse stirred. Something wasn't right. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer Reyes, if you have something to present regarding your K-9 unit's behavior, the court is listening." Reyes stepped forward. "Your Honor, based on an unexpected interaction between K-9 Blitz and a civilian, and the civilian's identification of the dog under a former name, I believe we may be facing a misidentification or history suppression issue related to the dog's origin." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And the relevance?" Reyes looked to Mira, then to Hale, then back to Blitz. "Because if this dog is who this girl says he is, he may have witnessed the very crime that led to the fire, and perhaps to this entire trial." The courtroom held its breath. Victor Hale's hand clenched so tightly around his pen that it cracked. Blitz didn't move, but in the silence, his eyes never left the man on the defense bench. The hum of the courtroom, already strained by murmurs from the last revelation, fell into an eerie silence as stoic, disciplined Blitz lifted his head and shifted. No bark, no growl, just a quiet tension in his body as he stepped forward from Officer Reyes' heel, muscles taut like a drawn bowstring. Reyes turned sharply. "Blitz!" he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible, yet edged with caution. But the dog didn't break his focus. Instead, Blitz lowered himself slowly, one paw at a time, eyes locked toward the defendant's table. The courtroom might have dismissed it as simple obedience until Blitz's tail stiffened, nose drawing sharp in the air, and then, with trained precision, he placed both front paws flat, lowered his body fully, and stared. Alert posture. Explosives. The blood drained from Reyes's face. Blitz didn't do false alarms. He was one of the few canines second left certified for compound-specific detection, the kind of work used in high-profile terrorism or federal threats. Reyes had seen it before in Afghan valleys laced with buried IEDs, and in a New Jersey courthouse back in 2019 when a pipe bomb was found taped beneath the judge's bench. But never, not once, had Blitz activated this behavior during a routine courtroom assignment. This wasn't routine anymore. The judge blinked from his elevated seat, momentarily unsure what he was witnessing. "Officer Reyes, is your dog?" "He's alerting, Your Honor," Reyes said firmly. His hand gripped the leash tight but didn't pull. His voice steadied, but his mind was racing. "Blitz is indicating the presence of explosive materials." Gasps flared again. Chairs creaked. A woman in the third row stood up and instinctively backed away before a marshal ushered her down. Victor Hale, the man who moments ago had the face of a bored aristocrat, shifted subtly in his chair. Barely perceptible, but Reyes caught it. The microsecond flinch, not of fear but recognition. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze narrowing toward Reyes. "Are you certain?" "I trust my dog, sir," Reyes replied. He wasn't exaggerating. Blitz had found homemade compounds beneath vehicles. Unearthed, buried, cell-triggered charges inside potted plants. He once stopped a funeral that was minutes from being another mass casualty event. If Blitz said something was off, something was off. "I request an immediate suspension of proceedings," Reyes added, eyes now scanning the courtroom structure. "And I recommend a full bomb sweep, right now." Victor Hale leaned back in his chair, slowly folding his hands together. "This is outrageous," he said in his signature velvet voice. "Is this the kind of theatrics we tolerate now? A dog sneezes and the state panics?" But his words were hollow, stretched too smooth. Behind them, there was something else, something cracked. The judge didn't answer right away. He looked at Reyes, then at Blitz, still prone, tail rigid. Eyes locked on Hale's defense table. And then he nodded. "Clear the courtroom," the judge ordered, banging his gavel. "Effective, immediately." People scrambled, the sound of shoes shuffling, benches groaning, and murmurs thick with unease drowned out any further protest. The bailiffs ushered people out by section, starting with the gallery, then the press pool, then the jury. Mira Carter hadn't moved. She was still sitting on the bench, arms tightly wrapped around herself, the burnt bracelet pressed against her chest. Her eyes didn't leave Blitz, not for a second. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed like she knew something the rest of them were still trying to understand. Reyes approached the judge's bench with purpose as two marshals cordoned the area. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to initiate the courthouse's emergency K-9 protocol. Blitz needs to search." The judge nodded again, this time more solemn. "Do what you have to do, officer." Reyes turned to Blitz, knelt low, and whispered, "Search." "Oh?" The German Shepherd rose without hesitation, body gliding into motion, ears forward, nose sweeping in tight arcs as he moved along the base of the defendant's table. Then the rear wall. The room watched like it was suspended in ice. No one breathed. Blitz halted suddenly near the floor vent. His posture changed again, firm stance, sharp gaze, front paw lifted and placed down slowly. Then a low, guttural sound rumbled in his throat. Reyes' stomach dropped. Not just an alert. This was confirmation. He backed up slowly and raised the radio mic on his vest. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3-1. We have a confirmed K-9 alert on possible explosives in Courtroom B evacuation already in process. Request immediate bomb squad and containment." The dispatcher's reply crackled back. "Affirmative, 3-1. Bomb unit en route. ETA 5 minutes. Stay clear and hold position." By now, Hale had risen from his seat, but two officers stood near him. His lawyer whispered something frantic, but he barely listened, because Hale was watching Blitz, and Blitz was still watching him. Outside the courthouse, a controlled perimeter had been set. Judges, clerks, attorneys, all shuffled behind tape lines, many casting looks toward the building's second story, where the courtroom windows still glowed faintly. Mira stood with Reyes near the K-9 vehicle, a shock blanket draped over her small frame. She didn't say much, but when Blitz returned to her side, done with his sweep, cleared for contact, she touched his ear with a trembling hand and whispered again, "Shadow." Reyes looked at her, then at Blitz. The German Shepherd didn't break eye contact with the girl. His tail moved just once, then stilled. Reyes exhaled slowly, his mind circling back to something deeper than the threat they'd just discovered. Something older. Something buried beneath fur and fire and memory. Something that told him this wasn't just about the trial. It was about truth. And it had just begun to surface. Rain had started to fall, a light, silvery drizzle that left a film of mist on every surface as Officer Reyes led Blitz toward the underground parking level beneath the courthouse. The echo of their steps bounced off the cold concrete, each footfall laced with urgency. Blitz walked ahead, alert but focused, the faint glow of sodium lamps tracing the sleek outline of his muscular German Shepherd frame. They reached Hale's limousine, parked where it always had been at the end of the far aisle, discreetly distant from the other vehicles. It was a glossy black vault on wheels, still humming faintly from use. A chauffeur stood nearby, clearly uneasy as Reyes approached. "Sir, I need to inspect the vehicle." "Court order pending," Reyes said, voice low but steady. The chauffeur blinked. "Now?" "Yes. Step back, please." Blitz didn't wait. As Reyes gave the command, Blitz circled the car once, nose grazing low, then stopping short near the passenger side door. He sat, ears forward, tail stiff, his trained final alert for the presence of accelerants. Reyes felt a chill. "You sure?" he murmured. Blitz lowered his head slightly, eyes fixed on the car's undercarriage. With a quiet sigh that felt like it carried the weight of years, Reyes signaled for the trunk to be opened. The chauffeur hesitated just a flicker, then pressed a button on his key fob. The trunk clicked open. What lay inside wasn't what Reyes had expected. Tucked beneath layers of folded blankets and a case of fine wine was a sealed aluminum briefcase. Not locked with a code, but reinforced. Reyes lifted it out, surprised by its weight, and laid it on the concrete. The moment the latch clicked open, a gust of chemical odor hit his nostrils. Inside, 2 canisters labeled with codes linked to accelerants materials consistent with those used in controlled demolition fires. Alongside them sat a charred photograph, half burnt, half preserved. It showed a young girl, Mira, and a large, dark-furred German Shepherd sitting beside her, both smiling in the soft afternoon sun of a forgotten backyard. Reyes stared, unable to look away. Blitz stepped closer, eyes locked on the photo. A small whine left his throat, barely audible. Not a signal, not a command, just memory. And for the first time, Reyes felt the fracture crack through the story he thought he knew. He radioed dispatch. "This is Officer Reyes. I need full forensic response to parking level C. Possible evidence linked to arson and obstruction of justice. Copy? Confirmed. Unit en route." He turned to the chauffeur, who was already sweating. "You had no idea what was in there?" "No, sir," the man stammered. "I just drive where he tells me. I swear." Reyes nodded, his focus already shifting back to the case. He pulled on gloves and carefully lifted the photo from the briefcase, studying the singed edge. It matched the burn pattern Reyes had seen before in the Carter fire file. Same radius, same chemical residue noted in Mira's report. And there, just faintly visible on the lower edge of the photo, was a blurred figure in the background. A man in a sharp suit, holding a cigar. Victor Hale. A deep breath filled Reyes's lungs, then escaped slowly. He closed the briefcase, stood up, and looked toward the elevator doors at the far end of the garage. Hale's mask had cracked once in court, but this would shatter it. The sound of approaching sirens filtered down through the concrete ceiling. Reyes glanced at Blitz, who sat quietly beside the case now, still watching that photo as if some fragment of another life stirred behind his eyes. The rain fell harder outside. "Let's go tell the truth," Reyes said softly. As he walked back toward the elevator, case in hand, the image of Mira's eyes flashed in his mind, too old for her age, haunted yet unbroken. This wasn't just about Hale anymore. This was about a girl robbed of family, about a dog who hadn't forgotten, and about justice finally catching up to power, dressed in expensive suits and forced smiles. And as the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, Blitz let out a quiet breath and followed. The sky hung low that evening, swollen with gray like it too remembered what had been taken. Mira sat in the back seat, her small hands cupped around the burnt bracelet, thumb gently tracing the charred edge. She hadn't said a word since leaving the courthouse, Her mother, Evelyn, glanced back at her from the driver's seat now and then, but didn't press. She knew the silence had a language of its own. In Mira's world, grief came not in waves, but in ash, coating everything long after the flames were gone. The car turned onto Sycamore Lane, and Mira's eyes lifted slightly. The trees here used to bloom wild, with yellow blossoms. Now, only thin branches reached like fingers, haunted by what they once held. The house stood at the end of the lane, rebuilt but never the same. New paint, new roof. But the front steps creaked in the same places, and the mailbox still bore the faint scorch marks no one ever sanded away. Evelyn killed the engine and sat still for a moment. "You okay, sweetie?" Mira didn't answer. She opened the door and stepped out, her shoes crunching faintly over gravel. The air smelled like pine and wet bark, but she could still feel the smoke in her lungs. Inside the house, the walls were warmer, filled with the scent of lavender and the soft hum of a distant kettle. But Mira didn't head to the kitchen. She walked instead to the far corner of the living room where the old photograph still stood. It was a photo of her, maybe 6 or 7, grinning wide with a missing tooth, arms flung around the neck of a German shepherd nearly her size, his ears perked, tongue lolling. Shadow. Evelyn joined her slowly, keeping just a little space. "You were inseparable," Evelyn said, voice almost a whisper. "He never let you out of his sight, even when you slept." Mira nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the bracelet. "Mom!" Her voice came out dry, hushed, like a door opening after too long shut. "It's him! Blitz is Shadow." Evelyn blinked, stunned, then gently knelt beside her daughter. "Sweetheart, that's not possible, baby. Shadow was lost in the fire. No one—" "But he remembered me," Mira said, more firmly now. "In court, he came straight to me. He touched the bracelet, Mom, like he knew it, like he knew me." Evelyn's face softened into something between disbelief and aching hope.
"Blitz, that dog was trained by the police. He's a K9.
"I don't care what they call him," Mira whispered. "It's him." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the kettle clicking off in the kitchen. Evelyn sat back on her heels, then reached toward Mira's hands. "Tell me again about the bracelet." Mira looked down. The fabric had once been woven black and blue, with a single silver thread running through.
"We made them,"
she said. "Me and Shadow. I had one. He had one on his collar. The fire. It melted mine a little, but I found it in the ruins." "Hey." Her voice cracked then, and Evelyn gently drew her into her arms. "I thought if I kept it, maybe some part of him would come back." Evelyn smoothed her daughter's hair with slow fingers. "Honey, you don't have to prove anything to me. I saw your face in that courtroom today. And his. There was something there." Mira pulled back slightly, eyes bright but filled with that tremble only children who've lived through fire know.
"He never barked when the fire started, Mom."
"He didn't panic. He just ran. He grabbed my wrist, pulled me through the smoke. He knew where the stairs were, even when I couldn't see. He didn't stop until I was outside." "You always said he saved you," Mira nodded. "But I always felt he was still out there, like he didn't die in that fire." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think Victor Hale had something to do with it?" Mira hesitated. "I don't know. But when Blitz looked at him today, his ears went flat, like he knew." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the chimes on the porch, 3 soft notes that felt like memory. Evelyn stood, then walked to a small cabinet near the fireplace. She unlocked it and returned with a tiny tin box, dented and faded. "I kept these," she said, handing the box to Mira. Inside were half-scorched pages from Mira's old sketchpad, a melted plastic star once stuck to her door, and a collar tag, blackened around the edges. Mira gasped softly. The tag read, "Shadow. If found, bring me home." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never thought you still had it." Evelyn's smile wavered. "I couldn't throw it away. He was family." Mira held the tag close to her heart, then looked up, her voice steadier. "If he's still here, if he found me again, we have to find out what happened. Everything." Evelyn nodded. "Then we start with what we know." She gently wiped a tear from Mira's cheek. "And whatever's buried in the ashes, We'll dig it out together. The blinds in the precinct office swayed gently under the breeze of an old ceiling fan, whispering across scattered documents and photographs pinned haphazardly along the evidence board. Officer Reyes sat hunched over a printed map of the city's industrial district, pencil tapping in a slow rhythm that mirrored the pacing in his mind. The silence was dense until the door creaked open. Detective Sarah Mackenzie entered with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen too much and still chose to show up. Dressed in a gray overcoat, hair pulled into a low, unfussy bun, she greeted Reyes with a nod instead of words. She carried a manila folder under one arm, her expression unreadable. "I got what you asked for," she said, laying the folder on the desk. "Property records, insurance logs, Hale's filings from the last 10 years. Reyes looked up, grateful, but weary. "You trust him?" he asked. Mackenzie scoffed softly. "I don't trust men with shoes that shine like his. That's where we start." She pulled over a chair, sitting across from him. Blitz lay nearby, resting but alert, his gaze flickering from Reyes to Mackenzie. The dog's posture remained still, yet something about the way his ears occasionally twitched gave off an undercurrent of tension, like he too knew they were circling something rotten. Reyes opened the folder. At the top, the title caught his eye. East Bay Development Fire. Incident Report. The 3rd of June, 3 years ago. His breath stilled. Mackenzie noticed. "You recognize it?" "That's the same night," Reyes murmured. "The night Mira lost everything. Her home, her dog. The bracelet she's still holding, it was found in the rubble of that warehouse." "No." He flipped through the records, eyes scanning dates, signatures, corporate names that looked legitimate until they repeated too often shell companies, cross-owned assets, tangled tax filings. He paused on a document with Hale's signature, dated just days after the fire. "Look at this," Reyes said, pushing it toward her. "Insurance claim submitted by Hale's subsidiary. Claims the warehouse was a storage site for materials that were never recovered. $5 million, Mackenzie read. "Payout approved within 2 weeks. No investigation." Reyes leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You ever seen a payout that smooth?" Mackenzie shook her head slowly. "Not unless someone made sure it would be." "And the fire? Labeled accidental? Electrical wiring. Except that building was condemned. Power had been cut for 2 years. That hung between them like smoke." Reyes looked down at Blitz, who lifted his head as if summoned by thought.
He smelled something in that limo. Something flammable.
"Traces of old accelerants. The kind used by pros. You think it's possible? That Hale orchestrated the fire?" Mackenzie completed. "More than possible. It's starting to look personal." Reyes exhaled. "Mira's father worked in that warehouse. Night shift. He died in that fire. And no one looked further. No foul play. No charges. Just ashes and silence." Blitz stood, moving to Reyes' side. He rested his head briefly on the officer's knee, an old gesture of quiet solidarity. Reyes didn't speak. He didn't need to. Mackenzie reached back into her coat pocket and retrieved a photo. It was from a security cam archive, grainy, black and white, time-stamped 3 nights before the fire. A dark SUV, plates partially visible, parked in front of the warehouse. "That's Hale's driver," she said. "The same car they found the accelerant traces in. He was there before the blaze." They fell silent again. This time, with the weight of something sharp between them. Pieces that once seemed disconnected were beginning to knot together Mira's trauma, the dog who wasn't supposed to be Blitz. Hale's empire built on ruins. "I want to revisit the site," Reyes said. "That warehouse, or what's left of it." Mackenzie nodded. "I'll get the clearance." "But Reyes," she paused, her voice dipping. "If we pull this thread too hard, it may not stop with Hale. He's protected. Layers of people, money, power. People don't survive going after men like that." He looked down at Blitz, who was staring through the blinds, eyes fixed on something invisible outside. "Then we don't go after him for power. We go after him for Mira, for shadow, for every name erased with the word accident." A stillness wrapped around the room again, but this time it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like choosing. The remnants of the fire didn't lie. By late afternoon, Reyes and Mackenzie stood before the skeletal remains of the warehouse, now a fenced-off lot behind a line of half-built condos, another of Hale's projects. Reyes stepped forward, gravel crunching under his boots. He knelt and ran a gloved hand over a patch of scorched cement where a support beam once stood. Nearby, Blitz circled slowly, nose low, breath even. Mackenzie reviewed the fire marshal's old notes on her tablet. They said it started here, near the west wall. But this beam wasn't part of the electrical system. There's no junction box here. Blitz stopped. He pawed at a spot near a pile of discarded construction debris. Reyes moved closer. There, half buried beneath ash and time, was a melted piece of metal. Reyes lifted it carefully. The shape was unmistakable. A dog collar. Twisted. Charred. But the tag, blackened as it was, still bore the faintest engraving. Shadow. Reyes swallowed hard. He died here. Then, Mackenzie turned away for a moment, giving him space. Even Blitz was motionless, his head low, tail still. I think he survived the fire, Reyes said slowly. Someone found him, took him, changed his name, retrained him. Blitz isn't just trained, he's too specific. He reacts to triggers. Like this bracelet, the courtroom, and now this place. Mackenzie studied the collar. He's Shadow. Reyes nodded, the truth washing over him, not like a revelation, but a confirmation of something he had already felt. And somewhere between the silence of the ashes and the soft breath of the dog beside him, the case stopped being procedural. It became personal. The overhead light in the precinct's back conference room flickered with a low hum, steady but faintly irritating, like a conscience one tries to ignore. Reyes leaned over a spread of printed documents. The edges curled slightly from the warmth of his fingers and the passing of time. The air smelled faintly of dust, burnt coffee, and printer toner, a scent that always reminded him of waiting rooms and unfinished business. Detective Sarah Mackenzie entered quietly, carrying a box marked Hale Industries, archived, 2019 to 2022. She was dressed in plain clothes, as usual, denim shirt, dark slacks, and that worn leather jacket that always made her seem older than she was. Not aged, but weathered like someone who had stayed too long in storms she didn't cause. You were right to dig, she said without preamble, setting the box beside the files Reyes had gathered. There's a paper trail, but it's buried under 6 layers of shell corporations and insurance jargon. Reyes raised an eyebrow, but said nothing he knew Sarah well enough to wait. She pulled out a single manila folder, slid it across the table. The 12th of November, 3 years ago. The fire that killed Mira's father and supposedly took Shadow. The warehouse belonged to a subsidiary of Hale Industries. But here's the kicker. 3 weeks before the fire, Hale quietly transferred the deed to another front company. Then, just days before the blaze, that new shell company filed a special fire damage policy. Reyes leaned in, eyes narrowing. Specific terms? Very. Covered only that building, not the others. Triple payout for fire if it could be proven accidental. Guess who filed the claim 4 days after the incident? Reyes already knew. Still, it hit like a cold draft. Hale, he muttered. Sarah nodded, opening her laptop. And here's where it gets worse. This wasn't the only case. I pulled 2 more claims with similar patterns, transfer of ownership, followed by fire, followed by immediate claim. Reyes rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to shake off the weight pressing on his chest. And the warehouse, that's where Shadow disappeared? Sarah turned the screen toward him. A satellite image, blurred by smoke, showed the skeletal remains of the structure the frame twisted, blackened. But what drew Reyes' eye wasn't the damage. It was the corner of the building, where a faint outline like a large cage or kennel remained partially intact. Animal housing, Sarah confirmed. The site was coded for storage and security training, but neighbors mentioned hearing barking often late at night. So he wasn't just Mira's pet, Reyes said, half to himself. Sarah closed the laptop gently. He might have been one of Hale's experiments. There was a long silence between them. Outside the window, a police cruiser pulled into the lot, tires crunching against loose gravel. Inside, the silence thickened. Reyes finally spoke. And Blitz recognized something in her bracelet, a scent he wouldn't react to unless there's a match in his memory, Sarah finished. And if Blitz and Shadow were ever part of the same training circuit, even for a moment, it could explain the reaction. Reyes let out a low exhale. So, what are we looking at here? Insurance fraud? Animal abuse? Arson? or something darker? Sarah didn't answer right away. She picked up the photo of Hale from the file, his carefully sculpted smile. The eyes that never quite smiled with the mouth. Whatever it is, she said, her voice quieter. It didn't start with Mira's fire. But that might have been the first time it hit too close. Reyes turned to the corkboard beside him and pinned up a new photo, this one of Mira, holding the charred bracelet in the courtroom, her eyes wide and wet with something too old for her age. She saw something. Maybe more than we know, but her memory's fragmented. Sarah stared at the image. Kids remember in pieces, smells, sounds, flashes, and trauma makes memory fold in on itself. There was a stillness then, not silence, but the kind of quiet where two people sit with a truth neither of them wants to name. She kept the bracelet, Reyes said finally. For 3 years, even when everyone told her Shadow was gone. That says something. Sarah's eyes softened. It says she never stopped listening. To what? Sarah's voice dropped. To the only part of the story that hadn't betrayed her. Reyes nodded slowly. He reached into the stack of files and pulled out Hale's recorded testimony from the first fire investigation. Reading it now, with everything they'd just uncovered, the words felt hollow, crafted, polished, too smooth. I want to reopen the file, he said. Bring in forensics, re-interview the neighbors, and I want Blitz at the warehouse ruins. If there's anything left, any scent, any trace, he'll find it. Sarah smiled faintly. You're finally letting the dog lead. Reyes allowed himself a short laugh. You ever notice how they don't lie? They don't have to, Sarah said. They just know. Reyes gathered the documents, placing them in a fresh folder labeled Priority Hale Fire. As Sarah stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. There's something else, she said. The payout from that fire. It didn't just go into Hale's personal accounts. A large portion was funneled into something called H-Genesis Project. Closed operations. No clear description. Reyes looked up sharply. Military? Maybe, she said. But off the books. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Sarah gave a soft nod and slipped out into the hallway, her footsteps fading down the tiled corridor. Reyes remained seated, the weight of a half-buried truth settling into his shoulders. Behind him, Blitz stirred from his quiet position in the corner, ears flicking forward alert, watching, waiting. And for the first time since this started, Reyes wondered if the answers wouldn't come from logic or law, but from the instincts of a dog who'd seen the fire before it burned everything down. It was just past midnight when Mira stood by the window of her childhood bedroom, the pale moonlight casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Outside, the distant hush of traffic mingled with the soft rustling of wind against the trees. Her breath clouded the glass, fingertips trembling slightly as they touched the edge of the sill. On her desk lay the journal worn at the spine, corners curled from years of handling. She hadn't opened it in a long time. Not since the fire. Not since Shadow disappeared. Downstairs, the soft murmur of Detective Mackenzie and Reyes talking over coffee barely reached her ears. Mira hesitated, then turned away from the window and crossed the room. She ran her fingers over the leather-bound cover, lifting it with the same reverence someone might give to a family photo album or a folded flag from a soldier's funeral. Inside, tucked between the pages documenting her childhood patrol walks with Shadow, was a small Ziploc bag. Inside, clinging to the yellowed page by static and time, were several coarse, dark hairs, German shepherd fur, pressed flat like the remnants of a memory she couldn't let go. Shadow, or Blitz? The thought stung. She didn't want to hope, didn't dare. And yet, she slipped down the stairs, barefoot and quiet, cradling the journal in her arms. Reyes looked up first, his features softening the moment he saw her. You all right? He asked. She gave a small nod. I think I might have something. Detective Mackenzie set her mug down, gaze sharp beneath the loose strands of her hair. Go ahead. Mira laid the journal on the table like it was something sacred, flipping slowly until she reached the page. Her fingers trembled as she removed the plastic bag, holding it out. These are from Shadow, she whispered. I used to keep his fur when I brushed him. I forgot they were in here. Mackenzie took the bag with the care of someone handling evidence in a cold case, her face unreadable. Do you mind if we run DNA comparison tests against Blitz? Mira's breath hitched. I need to know if they're the same. Reyes looked at Mackenzie, then back at Mira. We'll make it happen, but you need to be prepared, even if it matches the legal status of ownership. I don't care about the legal part, Mira said, voice barely above a whisper. I just need to know if he's still him. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted like everyone in the room understood they were standing on the edge of something delicate. The next morning, the decision came down from the department. Blitz was to be placed on temporary administrative hold pending DNA confirmation. It wasn't punishment. It was protocol. But it still felt like loss. When Reyes walked Blitz into the precinct kennel that afternoon, the dog hesitated at the threshold. Reyes knelt beside him, eyes level with the shepherd's stash. I know, boy, he murmured. It's not forever. Blitz pressed his head against Reyes's chest, a rare and deliberate motion. One paw lifted slightly before falling back, almost like he understood. Behind them, Mira stood with her arms wrapped around herself, unable to look away. The kennel door clicked shut. Back in the lab, Mackenzie handed over the sample to the technician with a priority label and a simple instruction: expedite. The fur was clean, uncontaminated, and decades old, but enough to work with. The technician nodded without a word, sliding the evidence into the sequence analyzer. Outside the sterile room, Mackenzie leaned against the wall, arms folded. How long? Reyes asked, his tone more clipped than usual. 48 hours if we're lucky, Mackenzie replied. They're pulling favors. Reyes exhaled slowly. You ever see something like this before? She glanced at him. A dog surviving a fire, reappearing 6 years later under a new identity with suppressed military service records? Number. But I've seen grief do stranger things. And love. Her words trailed off, but Reyes didn't press. They both looked through the glass at the machine, blinking steadily, digesting genetic truths from a few strands of forgotten fur. That evening, Mira found herself alone in Reyes's office. The precinct had grown quiet. Most of the team had left for the night, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead now louder than footsteps. She sat at the desk, fingers tracing the edge of Blitz's tracking collar they'd removed earlier. So many memories swirled in her mind. Shadow leaping over the backyard fence, curling beside her during thunderstorms, licking tears from her cheeks the night her father left. The fire had taken more than just walls and wood. It had scorched parts of her she didn't know how to rebuild. Until Blitz looked at her in court. Until he pressed his head against her bracelet like he remembered. She didn't need him to speak. The eyes, those quiet, knowing eyes, spoke louder than any words could. Mira pulled a folded photo from her coat pocket and laid it beside the collar. It was old and slightly faded. Her, at 10 years old, kneeling in front of Shadow, both smiling her with teeth, him with tongue out and ears alert. The collar, the fur, the eyes. Please, she thought, silently pleading with the universe. Let it be him. Across town, in a secure lab housed beneath layers of security and concrete, the DNA strands began to align microscopic sequences reconnecting across time. Nucleotides pairing like puzzle pieces, confirming lineage, matching markers. The technician leaned in closer, eyes widening at the preliminary match percentage blinking on the screen. He double-checked, then ran it again, then picked up the phone. It came on a Tuesday. The kind of day too quiet to be harmless. The kind of silence that doesn't rest, it holds its breath. Detective Sarah Mackenzie walked up the precinct hallway with a manila envelope clutched tightly in her left hand. Her knuckles were pale, her pace steady but deliberate. She didn't look at anyone, not until she reached Reyes's office door. Then she stopped. Inside, Reyes was hunched over the corner of his desk, flipping through a training log. Blitz lay in his usual spot by the window, head resting on crossed paws, eyes following the shafts of morning light that broke through the blinds. There was a knock. Then the door opened. "Sarah," Reyes said, surprised. "That was fast." Mackenzie didn't speak. She just held out the envelope. He took it slowly, confused by her face too still, too weighted. "What is it?" he asked. "DNA results," she replied. A beat passed. "You might want to sit," she added softly. Reyes did. Blitz lifted his head, ears twitching, as if sensing the shift in the room's gravity. He broke the seal and unfolded the report. Then his breath caught. A page. 2 pages. A line that didn't make sense. Then it did. Specimen A. Recovered fur sample. Submitted by M. Sorenson, Spezimen B, Saliva Swab, K9 Unit, Blitz, genetic match, 99.998%. No, Reyes whispered. But the paper didn't change. He read it again, and again. Shadow. Not a name on a roster, not a ghost in Mira's stories, but Blitz, his Blitz. The dog he trained, deployed with, trusted with his life was her dog. The one who'd vanished in fire and ash, now reborn in uniform, answering to a name not his own. Reyes blinked hard, the back of his throat burning. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "An hour," Sarah said. "I came straight here." She lowered her voice. Mira was right. Blitz's shadow. He looked at Blitz. The German shepherd tilted his head, tongue slipping between his teeth. That ever-familiar expression of quiet watchfulness. "You knew," Reyes murmured, more to himself than anyone. The pieces fell hard and fast. The way Blitz had reacted to Mira, not defensive, not cautious, but as if memory had returned in a rush. The way he had growled during Hale's testimony, not trained response, but instinct. Pain resurfaced. A lifetime of commands, trust, obedience. A partnership forged in danger. And all along, Reyes had been shaping someone else's story into his own. "I didn't know," he said quietly, voice cracking under the weight of it. "God, I didn't know." Mackenzie didn't interrupt. She simply sat across from him, letting the moment sit, allowing the truth to settle like dust in old light. "I pulled him from that kennel in Tacoma," Reyes continued, eyes locked on Blitz. "He was on the list for reassignment, said he was recovered from a suspected hoarding ring, no tags, no chip, just a number and a broken paw that had healed crooked. I didn't ask questions. He was smart, strong, gentle. I thought he'd be perfect." He looked up at her, broken. "I thought I saved him." "You did," Sarah replied, "but he was already someone else's to begin with." Blitz rose then, walking toward Reyes with quiet steps. He pressed his head against the officer's knee and let out a soft, low sound, almost a sigh. Reyes placed a hand on his back. His voice was barely audible. "I trained him to track, to protect, to fight. Never asked what he remembered. Never gave him the chance to remember." Mackenzie finally said what needed saying. "We need to tell Mira." Reyes nodded slowly, as if each vertebra had turned to stone. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his wrist. "And the department?" he asked. "I'll handle that," she assured. "But for now, Blitz is off active duty. Effective immediately, until we sort this out." Reyes didn't argue. Outside the office window, sirens wailed somewhere distant. Inside, it was just them and the silence of unraveling. He rose, walking to the file cabinet. From the top drawer, he pulled a photo dog and handler, taken on their first week of deployment. Blitz wore his vest proudly. Reyes, smiling like someone who had found what he didn't know he was missing. He flipped the photo over. Unit K, 9 to 118. Blitz. And underneath it, in handwriting he hadn't noticed until now, scrawled faintly in ink. Former ID, shadow, a forgotten note, a hidden clue, and it had always been there. He held the photo out to Blitz. "You remembered who you were," he whispered. Blitz rested his head gently against Reyes' chest, and for the first time since this whole story began, Reyes let the tears come quiet and without shame. The past came not as a whisper, but as a storm. The fluorescent lights in the underground kennel flickered overhead. Harsh, artificial, sterile. Rows of reinforced cages lined the concrete walls like cold steel coffins. Inside one of them, a younger shadow fur, still soft, eyes wide with confusion, lay curled in the farthest corner, shivering not from the cold, but from the echoing barks of other dogs and the acrid sting of ammonia that clung to the air. He was not alone. Men in black uniforms paced up and down the corridor, ignoring the whimpers, the cries, the paws scraping against metal bars. This wasn't a shelter. It wasn't even a training facility. It was something else. Something darker. Shadow had been taken the night of the fire. He remembered the smoke first, then the scream, Mira's voice calling out his name into the void. And then, nothing. Not until he woke up here. The flashback shifted, like a camera lurching through time. A man walked into the room with an air that made every handler stand straighter. tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored coat that didn't quite match the stench of the place Nathan Hale. He paused in front of Shadow's cage. "So, this is the one," Hale said, voice like broken ice. "The girl's dog. You're sure he has high drive?" One of the handlers, a man with a clipboard and a stitched scar across his lip, nodded. "He's reactive, alert, borderline obsessive when locked onto scent. Loyalty score was off the charts when we tested him post-recovery." Hale knelt, eye level with Shadow now. The German Shepherd didn't growl, he just stared, trembling but unwavering. "There's grief in him," Hale said, more to himself than anyone else. "That's useful. Grief is a fire we can mold." He stood and tapped the clipboard. "Start with sensory deprivation, then isolation, and if he resists, you know what to do." Shadow's world turned to silence. The scene blurred, then sharpened again, years later. A younger K-9 trainee, he wasn't called Shadow anymore. He was RAE 219 now. Reactive aggression experiment, someone had once said, laughing like it was a joke. But there were no jokes here, only commands. The regimen was brutal. No affection, no names, just tasks, lights, shocks, and cages. Days were measured not by sunrises, but by triggers and stimuli blaring alarms, the smell of gunpowder, the taste of blood from biting padded arms too hard, and above it all, a single word drilled into his mind: obey. Flashback. One stormy night, Shadow RAE 219 was tested against another dog, a larger Belgian Malinois, already half mad with fear and hunger. The handler opened both cages. Only one would leave intact. Shadow hesitated. Then, something deep in him, something instinctual, refused. He didn't attack. Instead, he pressed himself against the wall, refusing to move. The other dog lunged at the handler instead. Chaos erupted. Alarms, sedatives, blood. Shadow watched it all with tired, betrayed eyes. That night, they beat him. Hale was there again watching, impassive. "If he won't fight," Hale said, "then break him until he begs to." Scene shift. One final flashback. Shadow lay on the table under surgical lights. He was older now, his eyes dulled, fur coarser. A tag hung from his neck. Blitz. A man with gloves whispered, "You'll be part of something bigger. A program no one dares speak of. Dogs that can't remember who they were, only what they're told to be." A needle, a microchip, a new identity. In the past was scrubbed away like soot from a wall, except in dreams, in the tremble of paws during sleep, in the way Blitz always paused at the scent of ash. Present day. Detective Reyes stood in the evidence room, breath held as he flipped through the recovered files. Redacted documents from a disbanded unit under Hale's old corporate holdings. He could hardly believe it, but the notes, the behavioral analysis reports, the altered ID logs, they all pointed to one thing. Blitz was Shadow, not just biologically, but historically, emotionally. The dog had been recast. He staggered backward, heart pounding, not from fear, from shame. He had trained him, pushed him, rewarded behaviors born not from loyalty, but from trauma. Behind him, Sarah Mackenzie spoke, her voice low. "You didn't know." Reyes swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I should have." The way he reacted to the scent in Hale's car, the way he flinched at thunder, the way he stared at Mira. He remembered. He's always remembered. Sarah knelt by Blitz, who sat beside them now, calm but tense like he knew the air was different. "He was stolen," she said softly, "and turned into a tool." Blitz looked up at her, then at Reyes. His eyes, still the same deep amber from the photos in Mira's old journal, held no accusation, only endurance, a quiet waiting. Reyes crouched beside him. His voice broke. "I'm sorry." Blitz didn't move, didn't need to. Forgiveness, sometimes, was found not in words, but in presence. As silence lingered. Then Sarah stood, holding up the final page of the report. Hale was overseeing this program personally. This wasn't just negligence. This was calculated. Shadow wasn't the only one. Reyes looked at the wall of recovered IDs. Dozens of dogs, dozens of fates. But this one they could still save, still name, still return. The storm had taken him once. Now, it was time to bring him home. It started with a single tweet: "Blitz is Shadow, The girl was telling the truth. Attached was a blurry image of the DNA report, leaked from someone inside the precinct, followed by a picture of Mira standing just behind the glass in the K9 unit, her hand pressed to it, her eyes filled with something the world hadn't yet learned to name: the ache of remembering. By noon, the sidewalk outside the precinct was no longer quiet. Journalists first, then activists, then strangers who had never met Mira, never petted Shadow, but understood too well the feeling of losing something and being told you were wrong to grieve. Reyes stood behind the blinds in the conference room, his jaw tight, arms crossed. Outside, voices blended into a wave of indignation. Some held signs. Shadow deserves justice. No more stolen dogs. Listen to Mira. Detective Sarah Mackenzie walked in, holding her phone out with the screen glowing. CNN's covering it. The local story went national within 2 hours. Reyes didn't look at her. I should have seen it sooner. His voice was low, like gravel under a worn boot. The way he flinched at the first command, the way he hesitated with fire. Mackenzie softened. You couldn't have known. They broke him in ways that were meant to stay hidden. You didn't break him, Hale did. He turned. But I used him. Made him wear that vest, salute that flag. While his girl sat in therapy for a fire no one believed her about, the silence between them said more than pity ever could. Mackenzie nodded once, the kind that offered neither excuse nor condemnation, just acknowledgement. Then she gestured toward the growing crowd. They're not here to blame you. They're here because this isn't just about a dog anymore. Oh. Inside the building, Mira sat on a bench, arms wrapped around her knees like the 8-year-old she had once been. Shadow no. Blitz lay on the ground beside her, his head resting gently against her shin. For the first time in years, he wasn't alert, wasn't rigid. He simply breathed near her, as if each exhale tried to match hers. Her mother, Elaine, had come with a blanket, draped over her daughter's shoulders like memory, like comfort. But Mira wasn't cold. She was quiet. You feel him out there? Elaine asked softly. Mira nodded. I thought they'd call me crazy again. They're not. I used to dream that he would come back. Not as a K9, not with a badge. Just him. Just my dog. Elaine stroked her hair. He came back as both. That's how strong he is. Mira leaned down and whispered into Shadow's fur. Do you remember the sock game? Her voice cracked. You always cheated. The dog blinked once, slow, as if recognizing the weight in her tone. His tail thudded faintly, not in excitement, but like a memory responding. Outside, cameras flashed as the police commissioner stepped up to the podium. He looked tired, older than yesterday. The press conference wasn't meant to happen this soon, but the story moved faster than protocol. His voice echoed over the microphones. We can confirm the K9 officer known as Blitz is, in fact, a dog previously reported missing under the name Shadow. This was brought to our attention through new evidence provided by the family and confirmed by a third-party lab. A woman in the crowd shouted, "Why wasn't it found sooner?" We're conducting an internal review to understand how the dog was placed in the program without proper background checks. The situation is evolving. The questions grew louder, pointed. Is Hale connected to a wider cover-up? Will there be criminal charges? Why wasn't Mira believed? Reyes stood at the edge of the conference steps, listening but not speaking. He wasn't a hero today, just a man who got something wrong that he would spend years making right. Inside, the media wasn't allowed, but their presence seeped through the walls. Officers from other units paused in the hallway to glance at the girl, the dog, the mother. Some offered water. Others just nodded in silent apology. Reyes finally walked in. Mira didn't look up. He crouched beside her, eye level now. You were right, he said quietly. She still didn't look. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know we're going after him. For what he did to you, to Shadow, to every dog he broke. Her eyes flicked to his for the first time. He called him defective, said no one would ever want him. Reyes nodded. He was wrong. She wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her hoodie. Are they going to take him away again? No, Reyes said. Not this time. Later that evening, as the sun folded behind the buildings, the precinct released a formal statement. Shadow, formerly Blitz, would be retired from active duty effective immediately and would return to the care of his original owner, Mira Lark. Outside, cheers erupted like wildfire. Mira stepped onto the steps with Shadow beside her, leash loose in her hand. The crowd went still. Someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole street filled with applause, not the kind reserved for celebrities or speeches, but the kind people use when something broken gets put back together in front of their eyes. Mira didn't wave. She simply knelt, hugged Shadow, and whispered, "We're going home." Shadow leaned into her chest, nose buried in her hoodie, and stayed there unmoving, unshaken, as if the last 5 years had collapsed into this single, silent truth. He had never forgotten her, and now the world finally believed. The courtroom was a polished cathedral of doubt. Wood-paneled walls soaked in age-old tension. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. But beneath the solemn architecture, a storm was brewing, one rooted not in law books, but in a dog's blood, in the echo of a child's grief. Mira sat stiffly at the back, fingers gripping the sides of her denim jacket. Her mother was beside her, silent, holding her hand. Blitz, or rather, Shadow, was not in the building. Court rules wouldn't allow it. Still, his presence loomed heavy, as if the empty space beside Reyes's chair belonged to him. On the plaintiff's side, District Attorney Darnell stood by Reyes and Detective Mackenzie. Their case was fragile, but driven by truth, forged in DNA, old scars, and a child's torn notebook. Across from them, the air shifted as a swarm of sharply dressed attorneys in charcoal suits entered, flanking a man with silver hair and predator's eyes. Vincent Hale sat down slowly, calmly, as if the courtroom were his office and the judge an employee he tolerated. His lead counsel, Joanna Reeve, rose first. Her voice was sharp, clipped. "Your Honor, the defense files a motion to dismiss any forensic material presented as evidence, citing compromised objectivity. Specifically, the dog at the center of this case, Blitz, was previously under the plaintiff's emotional care. Any samples or behavior assessments drawn are inherently biased." Judge Morgan, a weathered woman with watchful eyes, tapped her gavel once for order. "Noted. But this dog isn't just a companion animal. He's also a certified K-9 unit. Are you implying the department's training records are invalid?" Reeve didn't flinch. "We're saying the perception of the dog's identity has been retrofitted to match an emotional narrative. Shadow, Blitz, call him what you will, he is still a dog. Dogs can't testify. They don't swear oaths. They don't give consent for DNA collection." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mira stared forward, jaw locked. Her mother whispered, "Stay strong, honey." But it barely registered. Reyes rose, steady but with something flickering behind his eyes. Guilt. Rage. "Your Honor, Blitz's DNA was tested by 2 independent labs. His microchip history is missing a 2-year gap, the exact time he was registered to a false handler tied to Mr. Hale's security subsidiary. This wasn't just some kennel mix-up. He was taken." Reeve smirked faintly. "Even if that were true, it's still circumstantial. You're suggesting this dog remembers a fire, that he recognized Mira after 6 years. With respect, Officer Reyes, are we now letting intuition replace evidence?" Mackenzie interjected before Reyes could speak again. "Dogs have been key witnesses in arson, murder, even missing persons cases. Blitz Shadow identified the warehouse's scent, reacted to Mira's bracelet with trauma indicators, and his scars match veterinary reports Mira filed years ago. This isn't a coincidence." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. This court recognizes precedent where K-9 units acted on scent recognition. However, it's new territory when that instinct becomes the foundation for legal action. She paused. "But the dog isn't on trial. Mr. Hale is." Reeve stepped forward. "And Mr. Hale denies any knowledge of the alleged dog theft. He further states that all K-9 acquisitions were done through proper government contracts. If one dog somehow ended up here, that's a bureaucratic failure, not a criminal one." Reyes clenched his jaw. He wanted to scream. That wasn't just some dog. That was her dog. The one he'd trained, bonded with, trusted his life to, only to learn he'd been a part of erasing a little girl's past. From the gallery, an older man rose. It was Dr. Leon Winslow, the retired vet who had once treated Shadow for smoke inhalation. He held up an envelope. "I request to submit original intake records, dated and time-stamped, before Shadow ever became Blitz. Reeve scoffed. Your Honor, but Judge Morgan motioned him forward. Let me see. The bailiff collected the document. Judge Morgan flipped through the sheets, her brows knitting slowly. Reyes watched every twitch of her face, every turn of the page. After a moment, the judge looked up. These records show Shadow's injury patterns align precisely with the canine identified as Blitz. The microchip transfer was dated after he was already recovered from the fire. Reeve pressed on. Even so, this proves nothing more than a clerical discrepancy. Dogs don't belong to people the way cars or property do. Emotion doesn't equal ownership. It was Mira who stood next, trembling but resolute. With respect, ma'am. Dogs. Remember. Everyone turned. Even Hale looked up. Mira stepped into the aisle. You say Shadow can't testify, but every time he sees me, he lays his head on my lap. He won't eat if I'm not near. He didn't do that with Reyes not once until I came back. That's memory. That's family. Silence fell. The kind that doesn't invite interruption. Judge Morgan sat quietly, then finally exhaled. This court will not dismiss the findings. The motion is denied. The defense may prepare a rebuttal, but for now, this case proceeds. Gavel. One sharp crack. Mira's knees gave slightly, but her mother caught her. Hale's team huddled, faces taut. And Reyes? He sat down slowly, blinking hard, eyes tracing the empty spot beside his seat, the place Blitz always lay. His chest rose with something between grief and defiance. He had trained Shadow, loved him, led him into danger, but not once had he asked the question that now haunted him. Who did you belong to before me? It was well past midnight when Reyes pulled into the gravel driveway of the Sato farmhouse. The porch light flickered weakly in the cold wind, casting elongated shadows across the frostbitten ground. He hadn't called. He didn't know what he would say, even if he had. Blitz sat in the backseat of the cruiser, ears pinned slightly, his eyes following every movement Reyes made through the mirror. Since the court motion, since the accusation of emotional compromise, Blitz had been quiet. Not withdrawn, just quieter, like he was holding his breath with everyone else. Reyes shut off the engine and sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked under pressure. Protocol said he shouldn't be here. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the Satos, not while the hearing was pending, not while Blitz's future was in legal limbo. But guilt had a way of breaking rules before you realized it. He stepped out into the chilled air, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the only sound for a long stretch. The farmhouse looked unchanged, weathered but warm. Lights still glowed inside. A late meal, perhaps, or insomnia too familiar to Mira's mother to bother resisting anymore. Reyes knocked. It wasn't Mira who opened the door. It was her father, Mr. Sato, his face lined with years of hard work and grief. His expression wasn't angry. That would have been easier. It was quiet, tired. Officer, Mr. Sato said, almost without inflection. Mr. Sato, Reyes replied, removing his hat. I shouldn't be here. Not officially. But I needed to come. A long pause, then a simple nod. You'd better come inside. The warmth hit Reyes like a wave as he stepped into the home. Pictures lined the walls, snapshots of Mira as a child, a faded photo of Shadow with her in the fields behind the house. The same dog, the same eyes. Mira appeared from the hallway. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but smaller, as if the weeks of legal battles had worn down her edges. She didn't say anything. Just stood there, waiting. Reyes's voice was low, as if louder words might break something. They're trying to dismiss everything Blitz found. Hale's lawyers are painting this as an emotional delusion, saying I've compromised the investigation because of my attachment. Mira's arms crossed over her chest, fingers gripping the sleeves of her sweater. But you know the truth now. I do, he said, his throat tightening. And I know how much damage we've done, training a stolen dog into a weapon and calling it justice. Blitz waited patiently at the door, ears up but tail still. Mira moved slowly toward him, kneeling and pressing her forehead to his. The gesture was so quiet, so private. Reyes felt he should look away. He still remembers the lullaby I used to hum, she whispered, not looking at Reyes. Not the words, just the tone. When I hum it, his breathing slows, like it did when he was a pup in my arms. Reyes's voice cracked. We never should have taken that from you." Silence settled, the kind that didn't accuse, didn't absolve, just existed. Mr. Sato poured 2 mugs of tea and set them on the table. No sugar, no milk, just the way Reyes used to drink it back before patrols hardened his taste buds. "You're not just here to apologize," Mr. Sato said gently. "No," Reyes admitted. "I'm here to tell you, I'm staying on the case. They told me to back off, told me I could lose my badge, but I won't abandon Blitz. Or your family." Mira looked up, her eyes shimmering. "Even if it ruins your career? I joined the force to protect what's right," Reyes said. "And for once, doing the right thing doesn't mean turning a blind eye. It means fighting for him, for you." Blitz moved closer now, pressing his head gently into Reyes's leg. It wasn't a plea, it was permission. He was with him no matter where it led. Mr. Sato's voice was hoarse. "Then you'll need to be ready, because they'll come after you. Not just Hale, others too. People who profited from this. Who knew?" "I know," Reyes said. "But we don't have to win the whole war at once. We just need to make the first crack in the wall." The old man looked down at the floor, then back up with a grim smile. "Then let's start cracking." Mira reached into a drawer and pulled out something carefully wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it and handed it to Reyes. It was a leather collar, weathered, burnt slightly at one edge. The nameplate still read, "Shadow." "I kept this," she said, "even when everyone told me to forget. He deserves to wear his name again." Reyes held the collar with both hands, his breath hitching. He turned to Blitz. The dog sat alert, waiting for permission to be whole again. Reyes knelt and gently fastened the collar around Blitz's neck. "Welcome home, Shadow." And for the first time since the investigation began, Blitz didn't just wag his tail. He howled, a long, low sound that began in his chest and filled the entire farmhouse with something ancient, something aching, something free. And outside, across the frozen fields, it echoed like the sound of a name remembered. The courthouse had long fallen silent. Only the distant hum of a janitor's buffer machine echoed down the marble hallways. Judge Evelyn Porter sat alone in her chambers, surrounded by open files and legal tomes that felt suddenly inadequate. The soft amber glow of her desk lamp cast a circle of warmth on the polished oak, but it could not chase away the chill in her chest. She removed her glasses, massaging the bridge of her nose, and looked at the photograph that sat beside her gavel. A yellow Labrador named Scout, long gone, but not forgotten. His eyes still seemed to follow her, even after a decade. The photo wasn't just a keepsake, it was a quiet reminder of something that didn't always make it into law books: loyalty. Evelyn leaned back in her leather chair and exhaled slowly. "How do you rule on a heart?" she whispered into the stillness. Blitz's case had shaken the foundations of her decades-long tenure. A German Shepherd trained as a K9 unit, now revealed through DNA as Shadow, once a beloved family dog stolen from a little girl. And that little girl, Mira, now stood on the other side of this courtroom, older, weathered, but still carrying the softness of a child who waited too long at a window that never revealed a tail-wagging silhouette. The legal question seemed sterile on paper. Can ownership of a police K9 be reversed due to proof of prior familial bond and illegal transfer? But the truth was anything but sterile. She turned another page, California Penal Code 597. 7. Cases involving animal cruelty, seizure of stolen animals, precedents involving personal property disputes. It all felt inadequate. The law was designed for possession. But what was Blitz? A tool? Property of the department? Or something far more enduring? Someone, not something. Evelyn opened her leather-bound notebook, the one she reserved for moments like this, when the law felt like it lagged behind the truth. Case notes. Reyes v. Hale. Subject: K9. Officer Blitz, a.k.a. Shadow. Dilemma: ownership versus sentience. Use versus belonging. Legal precedent: limited. Emotional value rarely wins against documented chain of command. Ethical precedent: uncharted. She tapped the pen twice against the page. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, like a ghost passing through the city. She wondered if Blitz heard it, if his ears still pricked at the call of duty even now, as his identity unraveled like an old sweater. There had been courtroom dogs before, therapy dogs, companion animals, even a Labrador that once testified, albeit symbolically, in a case of abuse. But never this. Never a dog whose past, identity, and loyalty had been co-opted into a system that called him hero, but trained him with pain, erased his memories, and gave him a new name. She flipped through the transcripts. One line stuck with her Mira's quiet voice, cracking as she spoke. He still tilts his head when I say moonbeam. That was our bedtime word. He used to lay his paw on my chest until I fell asleep. Evelyn closed the folder. In the end, the law was only as wise as those who wielded it. She had the authority to rule on admissibility, but it was more than that now. Her decision would set precedent not just legally, but emotionally. If she called Blitz property, she erased Shadow. If she sided with the department, she risked telling children everywhere that stolen love was non-refundable. She rose and walked to the tall window overlooking the courthouse steps. Earlier that day, activists had lined those steps, some carrying signs with Blitz's image, others simply holding candles. Mira had stood among them, her hand resting on Reyes's arm like someone anchoring a raft in a storm. Reyes, the officer who'd trained Blitz, who'd called him partner, who'd now risked it all to stand beside Mira and say, "This wasn't ours to begin with." It wasn't just the girl's claim. It was the dog's. And no one had asked what Blitz wanted. But Evelyn believed she saw the answer, clear as day, in the footage she'd rewatched late the night before. In that moment when Blitz, after months of service, after dozens of busts and commands broke protocol, ran across the court, Saturday at Mira's feet, tail still, eyes searching. A whimper so soft it wasn't captured on mic, but she'd heard it in her bones. It wasn't instinct. It was memory. She walked back to her desk and closed the files one by one. The decision would have to be argued tomorrow. The attorneys would cite ownership law, taxpayer rights, asset control, and department precedents. But tonight, she let herself think like the girl she once was, the one who grew up on a Missouri farm, the one who buried Scout under the cottonwood tree and wrote his name with her finger in the dirt. She didn't have a legal term for that kind of bond, but she knew its weight. Evelyn slid her notebook into the drawer and turned off the lamp. Before she left the chambers, she placed her palm on Scout's frame and whispered softly, "Tell me if I'm wrong, M." And as she stepped out into the hallway, the soft echo of her heels faded into thought, her robe trailing behind like a shadow that refused to forget. The room was dim, lined with corkboards stitched together by red string and taped photos that blurred the line between chaos and obsession. Detective Mackenzie stood in front of it all, hands planted on the edge of the table, jaw clenched as the pieces finally aligned. A grainy surveillance photo from 6 years ago showed a shipment crate marked veterinary supplies being unloaded behind a warehouse in Barstow. But, zoomed in, the edges revealed the truth, faint claw marks on the wooden slats. Next to it, a faded invoice traced the crate back to a logistics firm owned by Hale Holdings. Another pin stabbed the map, red string extending to a closed animal research facility in Nevada. Mackenzie exhaled. "You sick bastard," she muttered. She grabbed the manila folder labeled Project Orion and flipped it open. Photos of dogs, German shepherds, Malinois, Labradors sat alongside reports, stamped failed temperament, excess aggression, and worst of all, disposed. But tucked behind the clinical cruelty was something else. Internal memos between Hale's top security chief and an unnamed contractor outlining a trafficking pipeline. Purebred dogs kidnapped or purchased under false pretenses, funneled into off-the-record training camps, repurposed as K-9 Second without ever passing ethical oversight. And then there was the name she hadn't expected to see again. Rex. German Shepherd. Acquired juvenile. High intelligence. Beneath it, a microchip ID that matched Blitz. Mackenzie's throat tightened. Blitz Shadow wasn't just a stolen pet or an unfortunate recruit. He was one of the earliest subjects, the beginning of Hale's entire underground empire. Her phone buzzed. "Detective," came Reyes' voice on the other end, strained. "The search warrant came through. We're hitting the Ridgefield compound at 0400. You sure about this?" She looked back at the board. "More than I've ever been." The compound sat silent under the cloak of dawn. Surrounded by decaying fencing and silent floodlights, it looked abandoned. But the warmth of breath against a thermal drone's lens said otherwise. Reyes signaled the team. Go! They breached from 3 sides. The interior reeked of bleach and stale blood. Lined kennels stretched down a narrow corridor, most empty. Others holding dogs that backed into corners at the sound of boots. Cameras, hidden beneath vents, whirred faintly. Someone had been watching. Clear! Shouted one officer. Found a ledger! Mackenzie moved in, flipping open the dusty record book. Names, dates, chip IDs, and prices. Some crossed out with a single black slash. One column was labeled Conditioned Response Outcome, a clinical way of documenting behavioral rewiring through psychological stress. Her fingers stopped at a page. Rex. Response. Flinch to female voice. Excellent scent track retention. Reassign. Officer Reyes. Precinct 12. She froze. Mackenzie, Reyes called. You need to see this. Downstairs, in a concrete sublevel with no cell signal, a steel door creaked open into a storage space, chilled to bone. Inside, rows of hard drives, paper files, and locked briefcases lined the walls. On a mounted screen, looping silently, was a feed of conditioning sessions, dogs forced through pain-based response systems, some wearing makeshift police K9 vests. The footage cut to a session labeled Shadow, Stage 3, Hail Directive. There he was, young, trembling, fur matted in places. A man, Hale himself, stood just outside frame, issuing commands with a clipped, cold cadence. Shadow obeyed, but his eyes, they never held obedience. Only fear. Reyes couldn't look away. He trained him to be a weapon, he said hoarsely. Mackenzie's hand curled into a fist, and buried every part of who he was to do it. By midday, the news had leaked. Major outlets ran the story first. Police dog tied to secret trafficking network. Then came the images Blitz and Mira, side by side, with headlines asking how many more were out there. Protesters began gathering outside Hale's main headquarters. Former K9 handlers stepped forward with eerily similar stories, dogs who flinched at sudden lights, who collapsed under shouting, who didn't play like dogs should. One by one, it unraveled. And in the center of it stood Mackenzie's report, now filed with the DA's office. A 147-page exposé with annexed footage, audio, and testimony. The case was no longer just about one dog or one girl. It was about systemic abuse, a multi-million-dollar deception cloaked in public service. Later that night, Mackenzie sat in silence at the precinct. The evidence room was cold, humming. In front of her sat Shadow, no longer Blitz, his eyes softer now, less rigid, as if some layer had been peeled back. She reached out slowly. He pressed his head into her palm. You remember, don't you? She whispered. Not as a trick, not as a command, just recognition. The training field was empty that morning, except for Reyes and Blitz. Clouds hung low over the skyline, and the usual rhythm of commands and barks was noticeably absent. This wasn't just any training day. It was an attempt to recalibrate to ground Blitz in a world that had turned upside down. But from the moment Reyes clipped the lead onto his harness, he knew something was off. Come on, partner, Reyes said gently. Let's try again. Blitz didn't move. His body was tense, tail lowered, eyes darting across the field like he expected something or someone to appear. There was no aggression in his stance, just confusion, a deep, quiet unease. Reyes crouched, bringing himself down to Blitz's level. Hey, it's me. Blitz looked at him, not through him, at him. But the look in those eyes, once sharp and focused, now trembled with hesitation. Reyes had trained countless dogs. He knew how to read subtle signals, the stiffness of the neck, the twitch of an ear, the way a paw hesitates before committing to a step. Blitz was holding back, not from disobedience, from fear. Reyes unclipped the lead. Let him roam. See what he'd do without pressure. Blitz took a few cautious steps forward, sniffed the training cone, then turned around and sat down, not in the ready posture, but the kind you see when a dog is unsure if he belongs. The memory of that night when Reyes first saw Blitz, then just another K9 cadet with unshakable precision flashed in his mind. The obedience, the drive, the instinct to protect. Reyes had believed he was training a weapon. Now he knew he'd unknowingly inherited someone's family. Mira's family. And Blitz knew something had changed. Maybe it was the media vans camped outside the precinct, or the protest signs taped on fences, or the way everyone stared at him like he was part miracle, part evidence. Dogs like Blitz were built to read emotional tension, and lately, that tension was everywhere. Reyes walked over, knelt again, and placed a hand on Blitz's shoulder. "You remember her, don't you?" he whispered. "Mira?" Blitz's ears perked faintly. "I've seen how you act when her name comes up," Reyes continued. "The way you look toward the door. I see it." He wasn't expecting a bark or tail wag. Reyes had come to understand that the real answers were quieter. The way Blitz would pace every time Mira's voice came through a news clip, or how he whined softly when passing by the neighborhood near Mira's old address. Little things, but undeniable. A sudden noise, a clatter of weights dropped by another unit training 2 fields over, sent Blitz to his feet in a flash. He turned, body rigid, eyes scanning for threat. Reyes stood up beside him, letting the silence settle. Blitz wasn't regressing, he was reacting. Too many eyes on him, too many mixed signals. A police K-9 trained to act with certainty was now trapped in the middle of a legal storm, a moral reckoning, and the pull of memory he couldn't understand. Reyes knew what that looked like. It mirrored his own conflict too well. "Let's get out of here," Reyes said softly. He didn't call for backup or log the end of the session. Just grabbed Blitz's leash and walked toward the edge of the field, not to the kennels, but to the squad car parked along the tree line. They drove in silence. Blitz curled in the back seat, no longer scanning like usual, just resting his head against the window. Eyes half closed but alert. Reyes didn't head back to headquarters. Instead, he drove to a park near the north side of town, quiet, secluded. A spot where he used to go when he needed to clear his head after particularly rough cases. There was a bench by a lake. That's where he parked. He let Blitz out, and they walked side by side down the trail. At the edge of the lake, Reyes sat. Blitz didn't run ahead. He just stood there beside him, unmoving, waiting for permission that never came. "Reyes Sayed, I don't know what I'm doing either," he admitted, mostly to himself. "They want me to treat you like property, evidence. But I've seen you. I've seen the way you look when her name's spoken. That's not training, that's connection." Blitz finally lay down, head resting on Reyes' boots. "I'm not going to make you choose between what they taught you and who you really are," Reyes whispered. "But I promise you this, we're not going back to that training field until you're ready. Not until you choose to." Blitz gave no sign, no grand gesture, just closed his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, Reyes didn't feel like he was speaking to a subordinate. He felt like he was sitting beside a soul who, like him, was trying to piece together a truth too painful to swallow all at once. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter floated across the water. Blitz's ears twitched. Then his eyes opened, not with tension, but curiosity. Reyes watched him closely. "We'll get you home," he said finally. "Whatever it takes, M." And this time, he wasn't just saying it for Blitz. He was saying it for Mira. For justice. For everything that had been stolen. Because dogs don't fake trust. And Blitz had just laid it quietly, completely at his feet. The microphone wobbled slightly beneath her trembling fingers. Mira hadn't spoken in front of a crowd since the vigil the night Shadow disappeared. But this wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about truth, and the right to love and be loved, even when that love took the shape of a 4-legged soul who once answered to Shadow. Camera shutters snapped. Reporters leaned forward. Behind them, a sea of signs filled the courthouse steps. "Justice for Blitz. Canine second our heroes. Not property. She's his person." Mira swallowed hard. Her voice, when it came, wasn't polished or performative. It was steady, fragile, and real. "I was 12 when they gave me Shadow. I didn't choose him. He didn't choose me either. But somewhere between him chewing my slippers and sleeping outside my door every night, we became something to each other." A few reporters lowered their cameras. One woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. "They told me he was a German shepherd. Smart, protective, trained. But they didn't tell me he could read my moods better than any therapist. That he'd bark at my closet door when I was too scared to open it. Or that after my dad left, he stopped sleeping too. Her voice cracked. She exhaled, pressing a palm to her chest like she was holding her heart together. Shadow saved me from drowning once. Not just in water, but in everything. I didn't have the words to say. Then, one day, he was gone. Just like that. I thought I was crazy. I thought maybe I dreamed him up, like some kids do with imaginary friends. Until Blitz. She turned, and the screen behind her lit up footage of Blitz in uniform, walking beside Officer Reyes, tail slightly curved in alert attention. His body moved with purpose. But it was his eyes, those storm gray eyes, that made half the crowd gasp. "That's him," Mira said quietly. "That's Shadow." Silence. Not the indifferent kind, the reverent kind. The kind that falls when truth lands and everyone knows it, whether the law confirms it or not. Some people say a dog doesn't remember. That Blitz is a tool. That what I'm doing is emotional, not rational. But I've seen the way he looks at me. Not with confusion, with recognition. I've whispered his old nickname, and his ears lift. I show him a toy he once buried in our yard, and he digs, in the same place, without being told. She took a step closer to the podium. Her eyes weren't tearful now. They were lit with something else, something unshakable. I'm not here because I want headlines. I'm here because what was taken from me wasn't just a dog. It was family. And now he's caught in the middle of a legal battle about who owns what. Her voice tightened. But you don't own a soul like his. You don't own loyalty. You don't own the nights he stayed awake during my panic attacks. Or the way he stood between me and a stranger once, before I even knew I was in danger. She paused, then looked toward the courthouse behind her. Shadow Blitz was trained by someone else after they took him. Trained to forget me. But he didn't. That should matter. Not just in the court of law, but in the court of conscience. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some clapped. Others simply stood, heads bowed, as if honoring something sacred and wounded. Mira took a shaky breath and nodded once to the media coordinator. As the microphone faded, chants started up from the back.
Let them reunite! Blitz remembers! Justice for Shadow!
Across the plaza, inside the precinct, Officer Reyes watched from a narrow window. Blitz sat beside him, tail thudding gently. The dog's gaze was trained on the screen, where Mira's image still lingered faint, pixelated, but unmistakable. Reyes whispered, "She's fighting for you, partner." Blitz blinked. Then, slowly, he leaned his body against Reyes's leg, like he always did when he didn't understand the world, but trusted the man next to him. Back on the steps, Mira stepped down to the lower tier, where a group of K-9 veterans had gathered. One of them, a gray-haired officer with a faded patch on his sleeve, placed a hand on her shoulder. "My dog never forgot me either," he said hoarsely, "no matter what they tried to do." Mira nodded. Her voice, barely above a whisper, replied, "Then maybe we can make them remember too." The cameras caught it. The moment, not the line. Because it wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. The courtroom was silent, so silent that every footstep sounded like a drumbeat of fate. Moments earlier, a murmur rose when Blitz entered, but it faded the instant he reached the front. Officer Reyes walked beside him, not in uniform, but with the solemnity of someone escorting both a friend and a witness into judgment. Judge Evelyn Porter leaned forward, her expression sharp with gravity. Cameras were banned, but tension filled the air as if the trial had become larger than law, something deeply human. Blitz sat beside the evidence table, ears flicking at the hum of the air conditioning, eyes searching for Reyes. Across the aisle, Hale's legal team sat stone-faced, their strategy as predictable as it was cold. Cast doubt on the dog, humanize the accused, and hope instincts could be discredited. But instinct don't lie. The court-appointed behaviorist doctor, Marianne Hale, no relation, stepped forward with 3 identical bags. "Only one contains trace elements of triacetone triperoxide," she explained. The judge nodded. The bailiff placed the bags in a triangle formation, 8 feet apart. The gallery leaned in. Reyes gave Blitz a subtle nod, no command, just trust born from battle and grief. Blitz moved deliberately. He sniffed the first bag, paused, then the second, lingering but moving on. At the third, he stopped. One paw lifted, ears forward, and then he sat. calm, unmistakable. The room exhaled at once. Dr. Hale unzipped the bag under supervision. Inside was a sealed jar containing the explosive sample. Reyes knelt beside Blitz, whispering, "Good boy. You remembered." Judge Porter's voice softened, heavy with realization. "Let the record show that K-9 Blitz has correctly identified the explosive material under blind conditions." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A juror dabbed at her eyes. Blitz remained stoic, not performing, simply telling the truth in the only language he knew. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, in light of this demonstration and corroborating evidence, we move to reclassify Blitz's alert as credible witness testimony." "Objection," Hale's attorney barked. "He's a dog, not a deputy. This is unprecedented." Porter's gaze rested on Blitz, then Reyes. "Unprecedented," she said firmly, "but not invalid." The following testimony unraveled Hale's empire piece by piece. The prosecutor pressed him with evidence of unregistered dogs, covert breeding programs, and falsified contracts. Surveillance footage of Hale entering his Contra Costa facility and whistleblower accounts painted a damning picture. When confronted with his own transfer forms and internal memos referring to Blitz as a disposable asset, Hale faltered. A video played, showing Blitz muzzled in a training pen at Hale Tech, a scar still healing under his eye. The next clip showed his courtroom demonstration, tail low but gaze unwavering as he alerted on explosives. Mira's tear-streaked face flashed on screen, her reunion with Blitz, a quiet testament to loyalty. The jury's faces hardened. Hale's lawyers stopped objecting. Even Judge Porter's tone shifted less about legal minutia, more about betrayal. 3 days later, the courtroom held its breath as Judge Porter delivered her ruling. "This court," she began, "has reviewed extensive evidence and testimony, including the behavior of one particular K-9 officer under scrutiny. We were asked not only to judge Mr. Hale's crimes, fraud, obstruction, and cruelty, but to determine if Blitz's alerts could be considered credible evidence." She paused, eyes settling on Blitz. "In every action presented, Blitz has demonstrated consistency, training retention, and emotional intelligence that rival any human officer. This court finds Blitz's behavior to be credible and admissible." Gasps swept the gallery. Mira gripped her father's hand, tears spilling freely. Turning to Hale, Judge Porter's voice hardened. "You exploited trust, not only that of law enforcement and the public, but of the animals under your care. For that, you will serve your sentence without parole. M2. The gavel struck, and silence thick, final settled over the room. Outside, reporters swarmed. Mira waited near the glass doors, pressing her palm against the pane as Blitz turned to see her. His tail thumped once, then again recognition, not celebration. Judge Porter allowed the moment. "Let him have this," she said quietly. Weeks later, Hale's empire lay in ruins. Former employees came forward, lawsuits mounted, and animal welfare laws tightened. Fairhaven PD overhauled its K-9 program under the leadership of Detective Reyes, now heading the Ethical K-9 Task Force. Gone were the harsh drills and silent discards. Dogs were treated as partners, not tools. The first graduation of the reformed program was small and quiet, held at sunset. Each vest bore a line stitched in silver. "You are not a tool, you are a partner." Reyes spotted Mira and Blitz watching from the sidelines. "He looks good," Reyes said softly. Mira smiled. "He's home now. That's all he ever wanted." Months later, Mira founded Shadow's Promise, a nonprofit dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating service dogs. It began as a blog post written late at night with Blitz at her side and blossomed into a movement. Letters poured in, stories of lost and recovered dogs, and quiet acts of redemption. One evening, as Mira addressed a room of volunteers, Blitz sat beside her, his presence as steady as ever. "I used to think love was soft," she said. "But Blitz taught me that love fights, it remembers, it forgives." Applause filled the room, not thunderous but warm. Blitz nudged her hand, his amber eyes shining with the same quiet, knowing that it carried them both through. She finally turned to the defense table. Hale sat pale and frozen, like someone watching their own name being carved into stone. His attorney scribbled something furiously, but his eyes didn't leave the bench. In light of these findings, this court moves to formally submit the following decisions for judicial record. 1. All evidence discovered through Blitz's alerts is hereby considered valid and admissible. 2. Mr. Hale is found guilty on multiple counts: criminal fraud, falsification of canine performance records, obstruction of justice, and aggravated animal cruelty. 3. The court also recommends immediate review of any active cases previously influenced by Mr. Hale's training program. There was a stillness in the room, and then a shift. Reyes placed a gentle hand on Blitz's side. Mira covered her mouth. Her father drew in a breath that sounded like release after years of being held underwater. Judge Porter leaned slightly forward. There are moments when law and empathy intersect, where the pursuit of justice must recognize not only written code, but moral clarity. Blitz was not just property. He was a partner, a protector, and in every sense that matters, an officer. His loyalty never wavered, even when ours did. She stood, slowly, as the clerk moved to record the decision. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck wood, and in that small, resonant sound, the kind you wouldn't think could hold such weight, 100 days of fear, uncertainty, and silence broke like a dam. Blitz turned toward Mira. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees as he bounded toward her, not wild or chaotic, but with that quiet urgency of someone returning home after too long gone. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face into the soft fur behind his ears. Blitz closed his eyes. Reyes wiped his face with the back of his hand and didn't bother to pretend it was sweat. Judge Porter lingered behind the bench, hands folded before her. She watched them girl and dog, and for a moment, her jaw tensed. Then she turned away, walking slowly into her chambers, letting the door click shut behind her. Justice had spoken, but what echoed louder was something else entirely, a promise finally kept. The courthouse steps had never seen such a crowd. Banners fluttered along Main Street, children clutched plush shepherds with tiny K9 hero vests, and news vans lined the square. At the center stood Blitz. His formal vest gleamed navy with polished silver insignia and the bold letters, "Retired K9." Mira adjusted the strap, her fingers lingering on his name patch. She had cried enough in court. Today, she chose joy. The mayor stepped forward, plaque in hand. "Blitz," he said, voice cracking. "Your actions saved lives. You reminded this city what loyalty looks like when the world forgets." Blitz tilted his head at the mayor, but kept his eyes on Mira. He didn't need applause, just her. When Mira took the microphone, the crowd fell silent. "I never thought I'd stand here," she began. "I never thought a dog would teach me how to fight again." She brushed Blitz's ears. "When Shadow was taken, my world collapsed. Blitz didn't just help find the truth, he carried me through it. Nights I couldn't sleep unless he was there. Days I wouldn't have stood if not for him nudging me forward." "Blitz wasn't trained to love," she said, her voice tightening. "But he did, fiercely, without question, without condition. He didn't just alert on danger, he reminded us what trust looks like. And he never turned his back on anyone who needed him, not even when the system did." She paused, scanning the crowd. "We cannot stop here. For every Blitz, there are dozens of dogs lost in silence, abandoned, forgotten. We must fight for them, because they would never stop fighting for us." Cheers erupted. An older woman wiped tears while a teen held up a sign, "Blitz for justice, Blitz for hope." The mayor gestured to a cloth-covered statue. Mira and Blitz stepped forward and unveiled a bronze German shepherd, paw resting atop a child's backpack. The base read, "K9 Blitz." He didn't need words to speak truth. The crowd stood in silence. Blitz wagged his tail once, then sat beside the statue like a sentinel. Mira knelt and pressed her forehead to his, just for a moment. When the festivities ended and the trucks rolled away, Mira stayed behind. She watched Blitz run not like a soldier, but like a dog at peace. "You deserve this," she whispered as he returned to her side. In her bag were flyers, now endorsed by 2 council members. Reunite, rehome, reform. Tomorrow she would speak at schools. Next week, the state senate. And soon, the Blitz bill would call for transparency in K9 retirements. But tonight, she walked home with the dog who started it all. The sun dipped behind rooftops as Mira stood at the K9 Rehabilitation Center, heart pounding. She hadn't dressed for ceremony, just her old hoodie, the one she used to wear on long walks with him. Inside the gate, Detective Reyes approached with the German shepherd who had once been Blitz but was always, truly, Shadow. Shadow's ears perked when he saw her. He froze, tail still. Then came a whimper, a sound only she knew. Mira dropped to her knees. "Shadow," she whispered. Reyes released the leash. Shadow crossed the distance in silence, pressing into her chest as if 4 years of waiting and orders had just melted away. She buried her hands in his fur. "You came back to me." Reyes stood nearby, quiet, but moved. "He never stopped choosing you. Not once." "Will you be okay without him?" Mira asked. Reyes smiled softly. "He was never mine to keep, only mine to protect until he could come home." Shadow turned to Reyes, pressing his head gently against the detective's thigh. No command, just acknowledgement. "You did good, partner," Reyes said. "But this," he glanced at Mira, "this is where your story began, and where it should end." That night, Shadow lay curled by the window of Mira's home, wearing his name again, Shadow stitched in navy thread by Mira herself. Mira sat on the couch with tea in hand, her brother Leo flipping through old photo albums. Their mother moved quietly in the kitchen. No one spoke much. Words felt too small. "You remember this place, don't you?" Mira asked softly. Shadow stood, patted over, and nudged her wrist. She smiled and stroked the fur behind his ears. "I missed you every day." Leo found a photo of a younger Mira hugging a goofy, hat-wearing Shadow. "You were always such a clown," he said, laughing. Shadow blinked and laid his head on Mira's lap. Something in the room loosened, a quiet healing. Later, Mira stepped out onto the back porch. Shadow followed. Stars spread across the navy sky, fireflies blinking in the tall grass. "It still doesn't feel real," she murmured. "That you're home, that we got justice." Shadow's ears twitched, but he stayed still. "I want to start something," Mira said. "A search network. Not just for pets, for working dogs, veterans, all of them. We'll call it Homeward Hounds. What do you think?" Shadow met her gaze. His eyes seemed to say, "Yes." She pulled out his old tag, Shadow 009, dented but precious. Reyes had mailed it with a note. "He was always yours." "I'm going to make this mean something," she whispered. Inside, her mother turned on a kitchen light, a signal that bedtime neared. "Come on, big guy," Mira said. But Shadow paused, looking at the field where they once ran. She smiled. "Tomorrow," she promised. "We'll go together." That night, Shadow lay beside Mira's bed, just as before. She slept deeply for the first time in months, hand resting over the edge, fingers brushing his fur. No nightmares, just peace. In the quiet early hours, Shadow let out a slow, contented sigh, the sound of a dog who knows he is home. And Mira, dreaming of sunlight and golden fields, knew one truth: some bonds always find their way back. The courtroom that once echoed with objections now stood silent. Judge Porter's gavel sealed Jeremiah Hale's fate. There was no applause when Hale was led away in cuffs, only a heavy, just silence. Outside, gray skies loomed over Fairhaven. News vans cluttered the courthouse steps. Headlines blared. Jeremiah Hale sentenced, once a titan, now fallen. In his cell, Hale sat motionless, the orange jumpsuit clinging to him like disgrace-made fabric. Decades of power and wealth collapsed in 47 days of testimony. Fraud, animal cruelty, obstruction, his empire was gone. Yet what haunted him most wasn't the verdict, but the memory of Blitzshadow, the dog whose eyes had looked through him in court, silent but damning. Media coverage tore through every detail. Shell companies, dogs stolen, renamed, and sold to unsanctioned handlers. Veterinary records forged. Tracking chips removed. And one name Blitz kept returning, not as evidence, but as a hero. Beside him was Mira Alvarez, the girl who refused to forget. Drone footage of Hale's estate, now sealed by federal tape, filled nightly broadcasts. Former employees spoke out. Videos of brutal training methods surfaced, fueling lawsuits and federal investigations. Hale's empire wasn't just collapsing, it was disintegrating. In prison, Hale watched it all. He saw Shadow standing beside Mira during the city celebration, embraced not as property, but family. "He never forgot her," one reporter said. Hale turned from the screen. Tears, rolling tears, not of remorse, but of bitter defeat. A dog he once dismissed had brought him down. The reform began quietly, behind closed doors. Detective Reyes stood in the Fairhaven PD operations hall, watching old canine manuals get boxed up. "They never even told us where half these dogs came from," she muttered. Officer Darnell nodded grimly. The Hale scandal forced every department tied to his network to face the truth. A sweeping policy overhaul followed. No more third-party brokers. Every K-9 would undergo triple vetting, verified origins, independent behavioral assessments, and psychological evaluations by certified veterinary specialists. No more euphemisms like unfit for duty, leading to quiet euthanasia. Every retired dog would be placed in homes. The Ethical K-9 Task Force held its first meeting in a small city hall wing. Reyes led with quiet authority. "We can't rewrite history, but we can damn well change the future." Officer Perez asked, "What about the dogs who fail?" "We place them," Reyes said firmly. "No more discards. No more forgotten heroes." She thought of Mira, 15 now, quiet but fierce. Without her, Blitz would have been lost forever. Without her, the public wouldn't have demanded change. Months later, the Fairhaven K-9 Training Center reopened, rebuilt from the ground up. Gone were the cold pens. Dogs now began their training with trust building, walking, playing, simply existing with their handlers. Rook, a trembling German shepherd, refused to enter the yard for days. Officer Jenna Lee spent afternoons sitting with him in the sun, reading aloud until, on the 5th day, he placed his head on her boot. Connection, not control, was the foundation now. At the first graduation ceremony, handlers stood beside their dogs at sunset. Each vest bore a silver thread inscription. "You are not a tool. You are a partner." Blitz, now retired, watched from the sidelines with Mira. Reyes approached. "He looks good," she said. "He is good," Mira replied softly. "He still perks up when he hears sirens, but he doesn't shake anymore." Reyes knelt and brushed Blitz's neck. "I'm sorry we didn't protect him sooner." Blitz licked her fingers, his quiet forgiveness. Weeks later, Reyes presented Fairhaven PD's new K-9 reform model to the state board. "These dogs save lives. They carry burdens we can't imagine. The least we can do is meet them with dignity." The room erupted in applause. 8 months after the trial, the community center filled with volunteers, children, and first responders for a different kind of ceremony, one celebrating Shadow's promise. The nonprofit Mira had founded almost by accident. What began as a heartfelt blog post, written late at night with Shadow at her side, had turned into a movement. Letters poured in stories of lost dogs, rescued dogs, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Shadow, ever patient, sat at Mira's feet while a projector played footage of him visiting schools. A group of second graders had once circled him, each laying a hand on his back as Mira read a picture book about his life. "He's like a superhero," one boy whispered. Reyes arrived carrying a box of 20 ID tags, each etched with the names of dogs rescued through Shadow's promise: Brutus, Luna, Coda, Roxy. "He saved more than just you," Reyes said quietly. Mira nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah, he did." Later, Mira stood on stage beside Shadow, his leash in her hand. A banner above them read, "Every dog deserves to be remembered." "I used to think love was soft," Mira began. "But loving Shadow taught me that real love is fierce. It fights. It remembers. It forgives." She looked down at him, her smile tender. "Shadow's promise isn't just about saving dogs. It's about changing how we see them, remembering that loyalty isn't a tool to exploit, but a gift." Applause filled the room, warm, lasting. Shadow nudged her leg, as if to say, "We're not done yet." Media attention grew. Morning shows, magazine features, viral videos of Shadow visiting shelters and veterans clinics. But Mira kept it grounded. Shadow didn't care for cameras. He cared for the child who whispered secrets into his ear, the veteran who cried quietly as he held him, the girl who mouthed brave after weeks of silence. "Healing often begins in silence," Mira told a reporter. "In just being there." One autumn evening, Mira sat on the porch with her parents. Shadow lay at her feet, eyes on the stars. "Do you think he remembers it all?" her father asked. "I think he remembers what matters," Mira said. And she knew then, Shadow's promise wasn't just a nonprofit. It was a way of honoring the past, turning pain into purpose, memory into momentum. The movement would live on in every officer retrained, every dog rehomed, every child taught compassion. But most of all, it lived in the quiet moments, when the world went still, and a girl and her dog simply sat together whole, At last, the stage lights warmed the edge of the dark blue carpet, casting a soft glow on the podium centered beneath the banner. National Summit on Animal Rights and Welfare, Washington, D.C. Behind it, rows of seats buzzed with quiet anticipation. Reporters, advocates, scientists, and policy leaders had flown in from across the country to attend. And at the center of it all stood a girl barely 16. Mira's fingers trembled lightly on the sides of the wooden podium. Her breath caught in her chest for a moment, not out of fear, but from the weight of memory. Then she looked down. At her feet, sitting tall and steady, was Shadow. His muzzle was grayer now, softened by time, but the same fierce, loyal fire still burned in his eyes. The same eyes that once stared down danger, that had waited, without promise or assurance, for the one soul who never gave up on him. "My name is Mira Anders," she began, "and this is Shadow. You may know him as Blitz. You may have read about what happened in Evergreen. But I'm here to tell you not about headlines or courtrooms, but about love, and what it means when we choose to fight for those who have no voice." The room quieted. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. She continued, her voice gaining strength. 3 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and watched a dog, the dog I thought I'd lost forever, testify without words, and the world listened. They didn't listen to me at first, but they listened to him. They saw his scars, his unwavering eyes, his silent truths, and that changed everything. Reyes, seated in the front row beside Mira's mother, swallowed hard. He was older too. The lines near his eyes had deepened, and his once rigid posture had softened with time, but his heart still bore the badge, even if he no longer wore one. Mira's speech pressed forward like a tide rising, measured, unstoppable. "What happened to Shadow wasn't just about one stolen dog," she said. "It was about a system that forgot compassion, that chose profit over protection. But we didn't just fight to bring him home. We fought to make sure no animal had to endure what he did again." She glanced at Shadow, who met her gaze with a calm that made the room still. "Today, Shadow is more than a symbol. He's a partner in healing. He visits shelters, schools, trauma centers. He lays his head beside children who don't yet have the words to express their pain. And sometimes, just his presence is enough." There was a pause. Not dramatic, just quiet, like a sigh shared between old friends. "Shadow's Promise, our nonprofit, now works in over 20 states, she added. "We've helped reunite more than 600 missing pets with their families. We've passed 3 state-level bills to improve protections for working dogs. And we're just getting started." From the corner of the stage, a large projector screen lit up, showing brief footage. Children hugging Shadow, lawmakers shaking Mira's hand. A fenced green space named Blitz Memorial Field, built beside a renovated K-9 unit shelter. Applause swelled gently at first, then built to a standing ovation. Mira stepped back slightly from the podium, blinking through the brightness and the warmth of it all. But she didn't wave. She just knelt, quietly, beside Shadow. Her hand rested on the back of his neck, fingers buried in the thick ruff of fur that had once been caked in fear. Reyes rose to his feet in the audience. Their eyes met hers, filled with a conviction far beyond her years, his with a mixture of pride and humility. He had seen this girl fight when no one believed her. He had held the leash when she couldn't, and now he was simply there, in the crowd, clapping like any proud uncle might. Later that evening, long after the crowd had filtered out and the bright lights had dimmed, Mira and Reyes walked along the marble paths outside the Lincoln Memorial. The air was cool, scented with cherry blossoms, not yet in bloom. Shadow trotted ahead, ears flicking to every passing whisper. "Your dad would have been proud," Reyes said quietly, hands tucked in his coat pockets. Mira looked up at him. "You think so?" He nodded. "Not because of what you've done, but because of who you've become." She was quiet for a beat. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Reyes smiled. "You didn't." Shadow paused near the base of the monument steps, glancing back. And in that moment between marble and memory, silence and legacy, the 3 of them stood as more than survivor, officer, and dog. They were family, formed not by blood, but by choice, by fire, by every impossible moment that led to this one. And as they turned toward the reflecting pool, its waters calm and still beneath the stars, Shadow came to Mira's side and brushed his head gently against her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Some bonds, after all, speak best in silence. The summer air was soft with dusk light, the kind that lingers a little longer in the warmth of July. Families gathered on the grass under paper lanterns and string lights at the city's annual Hope and Pause celebration, an event that had grown from a local tribute to animal heroes into a national moment of gratitude and advocacy. Children ran barefoot on the open lawn, their laughter drifting like wind chimes. Booths lined the pathways, rescue shelters, K-9 units offering meet and greets, and a quiet corner where an aging German shepherd lay, his muzzle silvered with time. Shadow. His presence alone still drew a hush from those who remembered a living legend. Once, Blitz, the decorated K-9. Now Shadow, the heart of a movement. His eyes followed the flurry of the evening not out of restlessness, but alert affection. He no longer barked for show, no longer chased suspects in the night. But the instincts remained, the stillness that could feel a shift in wind, the tension in a muscle before movement. Mira sat beside him, now 15, dressed in a simple white blouse with a pin of his silhouette over her heart. She had spoken earlier, her voice calm, measured, but stirring. She'd recounted not just the story of rescue, but of transformation, the boy who found his way home, the girl who found her voice, and the dog who made both possible. Shadow had laid his head on her boot as she spoke, as if holding her steady. "Hot cocoa after this?" she whispered now, brushing a hand along his ear. Shadow blinked slowly. A quiet yes. Across the square, a child screamed. It was sharp. Not startled like from a game, but a piercing cry knotted with fear. People turned. Movement rippled through the crowd as a vendor's canopy collapsed near the fountain, where 2 toddlers had wandered moments before. One child had gotten clear, but the other, no more than 3, was caught beneath tangled poles and canvas, just inches from a boiling pot of cider knocked loose from the stall. It happened fast. The crowd surged, but paused, unsure. Shadow did not. Without command, he rose, limbs slower now, but purpose sharp as ever. Mira saw his body stiffen, his ears draw back, eyes narrowing as they locked on the child. Then he ran. The crowd parted, as if by instinct, a silent corridor opening for him. People gasped as they recognized him, still heroic, still urgent. The canopy groaned, its makeshift poles cracking under strain. Steam hissed from the toppled urn. The child's cries were drowned in the panic. Shadow dove low, pushing under the canvas with practiced grace. A moment later, a sharp yelp cut through the air, but then the flap of fabric lifted, and the child was there safely between Shadow's front legs, his body shielding her from a slipping pole. He didn't leave until the rescue team arrived. Only then did he back away, slow and careful, favoring one front paw. Mira was already running toward him, tears brimming, knees buckling as she reached his side. "You did it," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. His body trembled old joints and old courage. Meeting again at the end of something important. The next day, headlines circled the country. A hero's final act. Shadow saves toddler in festival accident. From K-9 to guardian angel, the dog who never stopped protecting. Photos of him, graying and noble, standing with Mira, the rescued child in her arms, went viral in hours. He became a symbol again, not just of bravery, but of enduring love. The kind that doesn't retire, doesn't fade. That evening, a candlelit vigil formed at Mira's porch. Neighbors, friends, strangers all came bearing flowers and handwritten notes. One little boy left a drawing of Shadow with a cape. Another woman, in her 80s, placed a ribbon on his collar and whispered, "Thank you for watching over all of us." Reyes visited that night. He didn't knock, just stood by the porch railing, his badge tucked into his pocket, civilian again. He looked at Shadow with the gaze of a soldier to another who'd earned his rest. "He's done more than most of us ever could," he said, softly to Mira. "I know," she replied, her hand resting over Shadow's ribcage, rising and falling beneath her fingers like a tired drum. "He always knew where he was needed." Reyes knelt and placed his palm to Shadow's paw. "Job well done, partner." Shadow's eyes closed, not in pain but in peace. He would stay with Mira for a little while longer, long enough for more gentle days, for morning light in the kitchen, for the quiet hours by the window, for one last snowfall. But that night, in the warmth of the porch and the hush of gratitude, a chapter closed, and the world, once more, was safer because a dog had been brave. The house was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that didn't come from sleep or peace, but from something softer, reverence. Outside the window, the sky bore a muted gold, like dawn wasn't quite ready to let go. Inside, the world moved slowly. Shadow lay on his favorite blanket, tucked beneath the window that looked out toward the garden. His breathing was shallow now, each rise and fall of his chest more fragile than the last. His once strong frame had thinned with age, the black saddle of his fur touched with silver. But his eyes, those deep, steady eyes, still held warmth. Mira knelt beside him, one hand resting gently over his chest, feeling the quiet drumbeat of the life they had shared. She was no longer the child who had whispered to a frightened dog in the dark, begging him to come home. She was 17 now, taller, steadier, but still carrying the soul of that little girl. And still, to Shadow, she was his Mira, his home. Her parents stood nearby. Reyes was there too, his eyes damp, though he made no move to hide it. Over the years, he had become something more than a detective. He had become family. The vet had told them there was nothing more to do. Shadow wasn't in pain. He was simply tired. A long life, well lived. Mira leaned down, her forehead resting gently against Shadow's. "Hey," she whispered, voice trembling with love and memory. "You don't have to fight anymore, boy. You already saved the world." A slow wag of his tail brushed her wrist, barely a flicker, but enough to say I know. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no sobbing farewells, only the hush of shared breaths and the weight of a bond deeper than words. Mira stayed with him as his eyes closed, her arms around him as his heartbeat faded. When it stopped, it felt like the whole world paused with it, a stillness so absolute, so sacred, that for a moment, time itself bowed its head. They buried him under the old elm tree in the backyard, where he used to lay watching the butterflies dance. It was the place where he had first let Mira brush the leaves off his back, where he dozed beside her during long afternoons of laughter and stories. She picked the spot herself, and no one questioned it. The community came. People who had never met Shadow in person, but knew his story. Children who had learned to speak up because of him. Officers who had changed how they trained their canine second. Families who had adopted, rescued, healed because of what Shadow and Mira had shown the world. They brought flowers, drawings, dog tags with his name. One little boy left behind a plush German shepherd with "Thank you, Hero" stitched across its chest. No cameras were invited, no press releases made. It wasn't about fame. It was about goodbye. Weeks passed, then months. And one spring morning, the mayor called Mira to City Hall. She arrived with Reyes by her side, unsure of what to expect. What she found was something she would carry with her the rest of her life. In the center of the park stood a statue newly unveiled, still wrapped in a linen shroud. A bronze figure of a German shepherd, ears alert, gaze forward, poised in eternal watchfulness. Shadow. Every detail was perfect. The angle of his stance, the texture of his fur, even the slight crook in his left ear from an old injury. At his feet, a small plaque read, "Shadow." From the ashes of cruelty, he rose. A symbol of loyalty, courage, and the love that saves, forever remembered. Mira's hand flew to her mouth. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. A quiet crowd gathered around her rescue workers, officers, school children, elders who had followed Shadow's journey from the beginning. The wind carried the soft scent of blossoms, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed noon. Reyes stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Mira's shoulder. "You didn't just save a dog, Mira. You changed how this city treats those who can't speak for themselves." She nodded, tears blurring her vision. "He did that. I just followed him home." At that, Reyes smiled. "He always knew where home was." The statue became more than a monument. It became a place of quiet pilgrimage. People would leave notes, collars, photos of their rescued pets. Children would sit at its base and read stories. Veterans brought medals, sharing moments with the only soul who might understand. And sometimes, late at night, Mira would return. She'd sit under the elm in the park, across from the statue, and whisper stories of her day. She still felt him there, in the hush before sleep, in the brush of wind through the trees, in the echo of footsteps that never truly left. Shadow had been many things. A victim, a fighter, a partner, a protector. But most of all, he had been love. Love that endured betrayal, outlasted fear, and never asked for anything in return. He may have passed from this world quietly, wrapped in the arms of the girl who saved him. But his legacy thundered on in courtrooms where cruelty laws changed, in shelters renamed after him, in the hearts of every person who had ever believed that redemption was possible. And in Mira, who carried him forward with every breath, every step, every promise kept. Some heroes don't wear badges. Some heroes walk on four legs, with eyes full of truth, and hearts stitched from loyalty. Shadow was one of them, and now, forever remembered, he watched over them still. In the quiet echoes of Shadow's story, we're reminded that love, the quiet kind, the steady kind, can change everything. A wounded dog, cast aside, became a symbol of hope not just for one girl, but for a whole community. His loyalty wasn't loud, but it was unwavering. That's what German shepherds do. They love without conditions. They stand by you in silence, in storms, in healing. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt something deeper than words, you already understand. These connections, human and animal, they save us, sometimes in ways we don't even see until years later. If you're looking for ways to deepen that bond with your own dog, there's a resource I came across that feels like it was made by folks who truly get it. Nothing fancy, nothing pushy, just gentle tools and stories to walk alongside you on the journey. You don't have to check it out, but if your heart feels a little tug, maybe it's worth a visit. Because sometimes, the smallest steps toward understanding are the ones that lead us home.